Act 2. Royal Magic Academy. The city of Azuurport moved with the steady confidence of a kingdom's heart. Merchant ships crowded the sprawling harbors, their sails painting the horizon in shades of white, blue, and gold. Fishermen hauled in the morning's catch, while traders shouted prices from crowded docks. Nobles rode through broad stone avenues in polished carriages, servants hurried between markets, and countless citizens went about their daily lives beneath banners bearing the crest of Vermont. To most of the city, it was simply another day. To one corner of Azuurport, however, it was anything but ordinary. The Royal Magic Academy stood atop a gentle rise overlooking much of the capital. Ancient stone walls surrounded grounds so vast that many visitors mistook it for a small fortified town rather than a school. Elegant towers pierced the sky, while countless enchanted lamps illuminated roads and pathways winding between lecture halls, libraries, laboratories, and training facilities. The academy had existed for centuries. Kings had studied there. Archmages had walked its halls. Generals who had commanded armies and reshaped battlefields with magic had once sat within its classrooms. Tomorrow, another year would begin. Servants moved everywhere across the grounds. Dormitories were cleaned from top to bottom. Classrooms were inspected. Magical barriers surrounding training zones were tested and reinforced. Groundskeepers prepared the massive battle parks where students would practice alongside their Pokémon. Specialized mages carefully examined the Academy's magic testing fields, ensuring every enchantment remained stable before hundreds of spells began flying once more. The Academy rarely accepted many students. Despite its enormous size, each year only a handful of new nobles qualified for admission. This year, however, was unusually crowded. 9 new students, almost a full class. For most schools, such a number would be laughably small. For the Royal Magic Academy, it was significant. Every student admitted represented decades of investment from powerful noble families. Each one arrived with years of magical education and often several trained Pokémon. Some would become court mages, others would serve in royal administration, a few would command armies. Some would try to become their family's pride and turn to military service, or higher, while others were simply happy to earn the title of Master Mage. Inside the central administration building, activity was even more frantic. The Academy's 7 professors moved through the halls like a small army. Orders were issued, schedules reviewed, class assignments finalized, and supply inventories checked. Assistants scrambled from room to room carrying stacks of documents. Later, they scratched endlessly across parchments. Even the Academy's headmaster had abandoned any pretense of relaxation. The elderly mage stood in the entrance hall, directing preparations with the precision of a military commander preparing for a campaign. The Royal Magic Academy did not merely educate nobles, it shaped the future leadership of Vermont. Within its walls sat the sons and daughters of counts, marquises, dukes, generals, admirals, and archmages. Alliances and rivalries were born here. Political careers often began here long before students inherited their family titles. The lessons taught inside these halls could influence the kingdom decades later. Across the academy grounds, returning students were beginning to arrive. Fourth years returned with the confidence of veterans, many already possessing reputations beyond the academy walls. Third years discussed internships with noble houses and military units. Second years eagerly shared stories from their summer breaks. Meanwhile, the fifth years, the academy's final class, walked the grounds with mixed emotions. For some, this would be their last year of study before joining the Royal Military. Others would return to studies and enjoy the title Master Mage, while a rare few hoped to reach even higher. Whatever path awaited them, they all understood one thing: their time at the academy was nearly over. As evening settled across Azuurport, golden light reflected from the academy's towers and windows. The grounds slowly grew quieter, though preparations continued long after sunset. Olivia Haxon stood in the middle of her room while servants hurried around packing the last of her belongings. Several expensive trunks already stood ready near the door. Dresses, books, magical supplies, and academy uniforms had all been carefully organized long before today. The servants were simply making sure nothing had been forgotten. Her Chimecho floated through the room carrying a ribbon in its mouth. Chimecho! The ribbon landed proudly atop a stack of spellbooks. Olivia sighed. That doesn't go there. Chi? The blue dress trunk. Chime! The Pokémon drifted away, completely unbothered by its mistake. Nearby, her Ralts was proving considerably more useful. The small Pokémon cheerfully stacked books into neat piles next to an open trunk. Ralts. Yes, those are coming too. Olivia smiled faintly before glancing toward the window. Tomorrow, finally years of waiting would finally pay off. Most noble children entered the Royal Magic Academy as soon as they were eligible. Olivia had delayed her enrollment by an entire year. A decision that had caused endless arguments with her tutors. A decision she had never regretted. Prince Augustine would be entering this year, and so would she. A small smile appeared on her face. As the daughter of Duke Haxon, her position was already secure. Few students could match her status. Fewer still could match the education her father had purchased. The finest tutors, books, and opportunities. Everything she needed. All that remained was making sure nobody outshined her. I learned from Reginald and Zelia, the two servants of the building, that this and many similar houses were built to house the students. There was a literal circle of houses around the academy. For the 5 years of study, one house was assigned to one student. Then it would be cleaned and renovated for the next occupant. The servants barely even changed, as this job was likely for life, or until the servant grew too old to work properly. Ventis thankfully did not have to pay them a single silver pence, as the king had made sure everything was paid up front for the entire 5 years. The two servants were quite chatty after learning that I was a very intelligent Pokémon. In fact, I was planning on teaching them a few modern recipes later on. "This uniform is super tight," Ventis groaned. The blue and silver uniform was indeed a tad on the smaller side. It was not too small, of course, but just enough to make her uncomfortable. "Do I have to wear this all the time?" "Dunno. We didn't receive the dress code or whatever rules this academy might have." I shrugged as I tried my best to adjust her long skirt. At least her knee-high leather boots were comfortable. "You'll survive it," I smirked. "The opening ceremony and banquet are Pokémon-free. Sorry." She looked genuinely upset. "Try to do something positive while I'm gone." She smirked and playfully booped my nose. I turned away to sneeze and gave her a fake stink eye. I checked the small red pouch Ventis had set aside for me. Inside were 50 small gold coins. I always made sure she kept most of the money, but I still liked having a little on me. Call me old-fashioned, but I enjoyed having pocket money. I took a slate and a piece of chalk, shoved them and the pouch into my tail fluff, and left the house. Thankfully, Pokémon doing chores or deliveries were not a rarity in the capital, so me walking casually through the streets wasn't out of the ordinary. I got a few looks from people, though that was likely due to my lovely hat and ribbons. Braixen. I spoke aloud in shock when I found an entire street filled with food stalls. The smell of rice, spices, and seafood hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, wow, what do we have here?" the burly man behind the nearest stall said. He looked at me curiously, though there was obvious amusement in his eyes. "If you call your master, I'm sure they can buy you a stick." He pointed at the octillery tentacles roasting over glowing charcoal. "Braise." I immediately pulled out my slate and wrote, "Give me 2. After showing it to him, I handed over a silver coin. "Sure." The man grinned, gave me the change, and handed over 2 skewers. The cooked tentacles were covered in a spicy sauce mixed with honey. The sweet and fiery flavors blended together perfectly. They were so good that I didn't even notice I had eaten the sticks too. 4 stalls later, I was forced to stop as my stomach practically begged me for mercy. Of course, that simply meant it was time to walk it off. I wandered through the merchant district, browsed the port, and even peeked into a few high-fashion shops that clearly expected customers with considerably more dignity than a Brazian carrying a slate. By the time I returned home, I had 6 carefully wrapped packages tucked under my arms. After tossing them onto my bed, I eagerly began opening them. One contained a marine blue and silver pin. Another held a lovely scarf decorated with melodic patterns. 3 more were bows in different colors for various occasions. And the final package? That was the true treasure. A new wand. My old wand had served me faithfully the last half year. A local carpenter had made it for me, and despite being crafted from fire-resistant wood, it had accumulated countless scorch marks. The tip was chipped, charred, and beginning to show its use. The new one was beautiful. Simple, elegant, perfectly balanced. Standing before the mirror, I tested each accessory before finally tucking the new wand into my tail fluff. Then I picked up the old one. For a moment, I simply looked at it. Then I smiled and put it away as a memento. Breakson, a quiet farewell. Then I carefully set it aside and admired my reflection once more. The Royal Magic Academy's Grand Hall had been designed to impress. Tall marble columns stretched toward a vaulted ceiling painted with scenes of famous battles, legendary mages, and the founding of Vermont itself. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, their enchanted lights casting a warm glow over hundreds of gathered nobles, professors, servants, and students. Ventis wished she was somewhere else. The young mage sat near the front with the other first years, doing her best not to fidget. She had faced dangerous Pokémon, corrupt mages, and even royal audiences. None of those had prepared her for being surrounded by this many nobles. Everywhere she looked were embroidered coats, expensive jewelry, family crests, and people who seemed to know exactly how they were supposed to act. Lady Balatoa. Ventis nearly jumped. Prince Augustine stood beside her seat, looking amused. "Your Highness." The prince waved a hand dismissively. "You look as though you're preparing for execution." "I feel like I'm preparing for execution." Augustine chuckled. "The opening ceremony is harmless. The banquet afterward is where the real danger begins." That earned a surprised laugh from Ventis. "There we go," he said. "You look considerably less terrified." Several nearby nobles noticed the exchange. "Could you please not call me that just yet? It still feels off." Ventis scratched the back of her head. "You will need to get used to hearing it." Augustine shook his head. The ceremony itself began shortly afterward. The headmaster, Titus Glacier, delivered a speech welcoming both returning and new students. The 7 professors were introduced. Rules were reviewed. Traditions were explained. Several older students looked half asleep throughout the entire thing. The first years listened with varying levels of excitement. Ventis listened carefully, not because the speech was especially inspiring, but because she genuinely wanted to learn. The academy represented an opportunity she never could have imagined as a child tending mereeps. By the time the ceremony concluded, the tension in her shoulders had finally begun to ease. Then the banquet started, and all that progress vanished immediately. The banquet hall was somehow even grander than the ceremony chamber. Long tables groaned beneath mountains of food. Roasted tauros, slow-cooked Magikarp, baked vegetables, pastries, more dishes than Ventis could identify. Ventis spent the first hour terrified she would accidentally insult someone important. The second hour was spent realizing most people were too busy enjoying themselves to care. The third hour involved far more food than she had originally intended to eat. Apparently, several noble families considered it a personal mission to ensure the newly arrived students sampled their favorite dishes. Refusing was difficult. The carriage ride home was conducted in near silence, not because she was tired, because speaking seemed like unnecessary effort. Ventis groaned. "I've been attacked." "By what?" I asked. "Food." I blinked with a smirk, petting my own stomach, which was also a hint bigger. "I guess we both ate ourselves stupid, though I did it with street food." I laughed. Ventis finally had a small booklet containing all the house rules of the academy. Most were pretty self-explanatory. Some, however, raised an eyebrow. "So, it seems that only first years are forced to wear the uniform. In later years, I can wear anything that fits the secondary dress code." She smiled. "I am worried about the one Pokémon rule." I poked the paper near the bottom. It stated that, out of respect for one another, and to ensure nobody had an unfair advantage, only one Pokémon was allowed to sign up as a partner each year. As such, mages could only bring their favored Pokémon. The choice could not be changed unless the Pokémon perished or was sold. "Are you going to bring Noctowl?" "He was your first?" I asked. But Ventis shook her head. "I assume most people know about you anyway, so it's best if we stay together." I simply nodded. "I guess. What about Terrence? I can bring him as a servant, yes. She nodded. But not his Pokémon. What are the others supposed to do? I asked. Relax, Ventis suggested, though she frowned immediately afterward. Staying in a house for an entire year with nothing meaningful to do would be torture for the others. Well, I can ask around. Maybe we can find someone like Umbreon for them. I laughed darkly, but agreed. Arriving at the academy early in the morning was new, but I expected I would get used to it quickly. Ventis was still annoyed by the uniform, but after wearing it for a few hours the previous day, the clothes had loosened up a little. At the gate, the guard checked her badge, her focus that she had received from the prince, and then me. As he used a tool around my collar, the man in full plate suddenly took a step back and raised his voice. Miss, your Pokemon's collar is not containing any restriction magic. He seemed surprised and not a little angry. Sir, she's bonded to me. Ventis raised her papers and showed them to him. While that made the guard a bit less tense, he pointed toward a nearby rule board. It does not matter, miss. I will guide you to the office and have Lady Orisha provide her with one that forbids the Pokémon from attacking any humans. You must understand that this is an academy for nobles. Any mistake could result in severe punishment. His voice was as rigid as iron. I just nodded at Ventis, so she reluctantly agreed. The office was bright and smelled faintly of lilacs. The woman behind the counter had lovely blue hair tied into a crown braid, with the rest gathered into a short ponytail behind her head. Lady Orisha, the guard saluted. Young Lady Ventis needs a restraining collar. As the woman waved him away, the man hurried back to his post. I was expecting you. The woman looked up from her paperwork. Let me properly introduce myself. I am Jane Orisha, and I will be your enchantment spells teacher. She smiled warmly as she stood and walked over to us. I heard about your perfect bond. Such an impressive achievement at such a young age, she beamed. Now, I know this is going to feel a little unpleasant, but it is for everyone's safety. She pulled out a sapphire-crested collar. It looked nothing like the plain collars Ventis had been forced to enchant before. This one was clearly made for noble Pokémon, crafted from polished silver with delicate enchantments etched along its surface. Then she gently fastened it around my neck, replacing my choker. Afterward, she handed my decorative fashion piece back to Ventis. Now hurry along. Your first class starts in less than 15 minutes. She pointed toward the academy's clock tower visible through the window. Ventis and I exchanged a glance before quickly heading for the door. I do not feel any change, Ventis spoke through our bond. That's because the collar magic does not apply to me. Oops. I chuckled mentally and bonked myself on the head like some doofus anime girl. She almost stumbled as she came to a sudden stop. Don't oops me. She looked at me with stunned eyes. Since when? Always? I shrugged. How about we discuss this when we aren't running late? I pointed toward the clock tower. She immediately started power walking toward the classroom listed on her schedule. We are going to talk about this later, in detail. I simply shrugged as I kept pace beside her. It wasn't like I could tell her that my mind was human and, as such, restraint spells specifically designed for Pokémon didn't work on me. We arrived with only a few minutes to spare. The classroom was impressive. The desks were crafted from polished cherry wood and decorated with silver accents. It looked more like a noble's private library than a place of learning. The back of the room had been designed specifically for Pokémon. There was a small pool, a sand pit, several padded cushions, and even a few climbing structures for species with more unusual needs. I tried not to look out of place, but the other Pokémon regarded me with undisguised suspicion and, in some cases, outright disgust. All except one, Duot. And we meet again, my good sir. I gave him a pleasant smile. Duot allowed himself a quiet chuckle. You have not changed a bit, Fenn. He shook his head while lounging comfortably in the pool. That is because perfection cannot be improved. The water type rolled his eyes. I settled down beside the pool and waited for the class to begin. When should this class start? I asked, murmuring to myself, when a girl with pale pink hair hurried inside and slipped into one of the back seats. From her bag, a gelatinous Pokémon plopped down and slowly slid toward us. A Gumi? My ears flicked up. You know that Pokémon? Duot asked. looking puzzled. Oh, right. Gumi are usually very timid Pokémon, but they are dragon types, I pointed out. The newly arrived Pokémon slipped into the water without a word and found the most hidden corner possible before slumping down. Isn't that more of a water or poison type? He asked. Nope. I popped the P with a smug look. I know most Pokémon. He still did not look convinced, but we did not have time to debate as the teacher walked into the room. The minimal whispering among the students stopped the moment the door opened. Even Augustine sat up straight. The teacher wore a military mage uniform. It was not a robe, but a sleek yet elegant outfit that reminded me of something from Full Metal Alchemist, if it had been a bit more decorated. The man was not bulky, nor was he particularly domineering, yet he possessed such an aura that even I found myself fixing my posture. His voice was measured to the point of being almost monotone, while his back was straight enough to be used as a ruler. I am William Dawnmore, he stated, saluting the entire class. First class war mage of the Vermont Mage Corps. I will now call your names. Augustine Vermont. The prince stood, returned the salute, and sat back down. Olivia Haxon, the elegant-looking girl with the lovely hairstyle, stood, performed a perfect curtsy, and sat. Cedric Ironhill, a boy sitting near the window with short steel-grey hair, stood and saluted so sharply I feared he might break either his fingers or his skull. Ventis Balatoa. Ventis stood and performed her curtsy. Unlike the previous day, it was flawless. Lucia Valtier, a boy and a girl with matching golden hair and blue eyes, stood together. Even their hairstyles mirrored one another, parted in opposite directions. Marianne Tidewell, a girl with vibrant green hair, practically bounced out of her seat and offered a considerably less rigid curtsy. Celine Everbrook. This girl looked like the very definition of an elite scholar. Roland Ashmere, a boy with orange hair that appeared to be losing a battle against an unreasonable amount of hair gel, stood with noticeably less enthusiasm and offered a salute. And our unexpected 10th student, Colleen Mistbound. The shy girl trembled slightly but stood and managed a respectable curtsy before quickly sitting back down. William Dawnmore waited until every student had settled before speaking again. Most young mages wished to learn how to throw larger fireballs. A few smiles appeared throughout the room. Cedric looked particularly guilty. Many wished to summon greater storms. Others wished to split stone, freeze rivers, or call down lightning. The teacher clasped his hands behind his back and slowly walked between the desks. Very few ask how to survive when those spells are aimed at them. The smiles vanished. In war, the dead rarely care how impressive the attack was. The room grew noticeably quieter. William stopped beside one of the windows. Your attack magic instructor will teach you how to destroy obstacles, fortifications, and enemies. He turned back toward the class. I will teach you how to come home afterward. That immediately caught everyone's attention. Even Marianne stopped fidgeting. You are nobles. Some of you will become military officers. Some will become court mages. Some may never see a battlefield. His eyes swept across the room. None of that matters. A few students blinked. If a criminal attacks your carriage, you require defensive magic. He pointed toward Olivia. If an assassin targets your family, you require defensive magic. Toward Augustine. If you are protecting your king, you require defensive magic. Then toward Ventis. If a stronger mage wishes to kill you, defensive magic may be the only reason you survive long enough to escape. Ventis sat a little straighter. William nodded once. Good. Some of you are already understanding. William continued speaking for nearly an hour. No demonstrations. No dramatic displays of magic. Just lesson after lesson, explaining why survival mattered more than glory. By the end, most of the class looked far more serious than when they had entered. Even some of the Pokémon had stopped fidgeting. Beside me, Duot sat with his arms folded, listening intently. I found myself nodding along. Honestly? The man knew exactly what he was talking about. I took a glimpse at all the other Pokémon. Besides me, Duot, and the Gumi, there was a decent selection. I had to admit, I expected at least this many water types in a water-based kingdom. We had a Chimecho who seemed kind of aloof. The same snobbish Hetena from the garden party sat right beside the same Absol, who actually looked interested in class. There was also a Buizel, a Ducklet, and a Luminian in the water. Neither really piqued my interest, and Aaron sat in the sandpit behind me, alone like some soldier standing watch. With the first class done, we had a small break. Everyone besides Luminion could walk, but she had a personal servant carrying a water bowl while following Lucia Valtier around. The prince seemed to prefer staying near Ventis, which made me a bit nervous, though I didn't show it. Oh, I am going to love the next class. Duot spun one of the shells on his hips. I have some pent-up energy I need to vent. Let me guess, this is the attack-based class, I smirked. Obviously, he grinned. We might even have a duel like back then. Don't worry, I will go easy on the water-type attacks, he chuckled. No need, I trained against water types. I cracked my knuckles. Ah, brutes. Hetena passed us on her tiny feet. Yes, honestly? Ducklet walked beside her. Every ruffian can be used by nobles nowadays. I was gobsmacked. Oh, I hope I get to fight them. My right eye twitched as a vein throbbed on my forehead. Chill, Fenn. Duot tapped my shoulder. You don't want your master to get into trouble, right? He asked, with a serious look. Fine. I sighed and muttered several less than dainty words under my whiskers. The next class was outside, under the sun. The training courtyard was spotless. Target dummies lined one side while spare ones were stacked in tall piles nearby. The whole area was surrounded by a magical barrier, so no stray spell could fly out and hit the buildings or unsuspecting passers-by. The class barely had time to take in the place when a man with unnervingly spiky neon yellow hair slid to a stop, his ampharos mimicking the cool entrance. Heyo! I am charged to see you all. He grinned as he saluted. I am Zeke Clash, first-class war mage of the Vermont Mage Corps. The man was extremely energetic, reminding me of far too many anime characters. Now, I am going to double-shock you all with my extremely efficient way of teaching, he beamed. Before I can start, though, I need to see what I am working with. Spark up my interest, would you? He was putting electric-type move names into almost every sentence, giving me second-hand embarrassment. Still, Ventis thought it was funny, so I just shrugged. Prince Augustin, if you would not mind, step up and wow us. The teacher pointed at one of the dummies. As you wish, Professor. Augustin pulled his focus from his belt. It was a sleek wand with a gold base and a diamond at the top. Said diamond was almost the size of an orange berry. His eyes focused, and an ice shard shot out, taking the head of the straw dummy with it. Nice job. Zeke gave him a thumbs up. Next up, Ventis Balatoa. Ventis walked to the next dummy and took a deep breath. This was the first time she had used her focus. Previously, she had only used her hands because it felt more natural. But here, it was expected that she use some kind of focus. A spell burst from the wand, much to both of our shock. I could feel that she had not been ready to release it yet. Still, the blade of wind cut the dummy at the waist, almost all the way through before it slumped backward. Very nice? Zeke grinned. Ventis walked back, her face turning a shade pink from embarrassment. What happened? I asked. I don't know. I started building my magic formula, but the wand fired before I finished the full script. Could the focus be faulty? I poked the amethyst tip. Unlikely. It was a gift from the prince. I am sure he would not gift anything faulty. Well, we will need to figure out why it fires prematurely. I shook my head. Why are you two just watching each other and moving your heads? Absol asked me. Oh, hi. My master and I are soul bonded. It means we can talk in our minds. It is a very personal bond, I explained. Interesting. He simply nodded and walked back to his spot. I was honestly happy that he had come over to talk, but he seemed interested only in that. Bummer. I really needed to break the ice. The other students went one by one, each showing different levels of magical prowess. Olivia used a dark-type blast, clearing the entire dummy in one go and sending straw flying everywhere. Cedric shot an earth bullet that had to be stopped by the magical barrier, while the others were less powerful. Then came our turn. Pokémon up! Zeke sent Ampharos to replace all the damaged dummies. I want you to order your Pokémon to use their most powerful moves. Do not worry, the magic shield can stop a raging Tyranitar. Since there was no real order to go in, Zeke simply pointed at Pokémon. Of course, Duat was first. He could hardly call on the prince's Pokémon later. Duat used his shells as boomerangs. They cut through the dummy twice, turning it into a sad pile of hay. I even high-fived him afterward, a habit he had learned from me. Most of the other Pokémon were lacking both in power and accuracy. Braixen! Zeke yelled, glee shining in his eyes. I walked the line, cracked my neck, and focused as hard as I could. Ventis had suffered a humiliation because of her focus, so I was not holding anything back. I tapped into all my fire and even borrowed magic from Ventis through our bond. I wanted to really stand out. Instead of a continuous stream of flames, I gathered everything in my throat. The fire became so intense that even I could no longer contain it. Then, boom! An actual fire blast erupted from my mouth, turning the dummy and the two already damaged dummies beside it into ash. Even the magical barrier shimmered violently as the attack struck it. The blast was barely inconvenienced by the targets in its path. The explosion shook the ground beneath our feet. At the same time, I felt as though every drop of moisture had been drained from my body. My throat burned and my limbs felt heavy. Still, I remained standing, still grinning. What a thunder punch to the gut! Zeke yelled. An actual fire blast! Most of the students started looking at us differently. Even Duat's jaw was hanging open. I simply bowed and walked back toward Ventis, who immediately moved to support me. You blew everyone out of the water, Augustin laughed. Braixen, I nodded to him with a smile. Marquis Dante Ironhill sat in his capital city home, though his mind was back in his territory. The Ironhill estate stood far from Azuurport, nestled among rocky hills, rich with iron and copper veins. Unlike many noble manors, its halls had been built for practicality rather than beauty. Thick stone walls, iron chandeliers, and sturdy furniture dominated the interior, creating a place that felt more like a fortress than a residence. Dante Ironhill could almost smell the industry of his home through his memories. The evening sun filtered through narrow windows as he worked through a stack of reports in his study. Trade ledgers, mining yields, and correspondence from neighboring nobles covered his desk. He was reviewing the latest shipment figures when a knock sounded at the door. Enter. Cedric stepped inside and offered a respectful bow. Father. Dante looked up from his paperwork. How was your first day at the academy? His son considered the question for a moment. Interesting. The Marquis raised an eyebrow. That was not an answer Cedric usually gave. His son was many things, but vague was rarely one of them. What happened? Cedric hesitated before answering. There is abrasion in my class. The quill stopped moving. For several seconds, the room remained completely silent. Braixen? Dante asked calmly. Yes. The Marquis slowly set the quill aside. Abrasion? Outside Jaushara? That alone was enough to earn his full attention. And whose Pokémon is it? A girl named Ventis Balatoa Thorn. The name sounded familiar. Balatoa, he murmured. The arranged marriage only days ago. Cedric nodded. Dante rose from his chair and walked toward the window overlooking the capital's estates. Beyond the glass, the late afternoon lit up the roofs, just as his mind was lit up by these news. His relationship with the crown had always been complicated. He was loyal to Vermont. The king, however, was another matter entirely. King Callister had spent years centralizing power, slowly increasing royal influence, while reducing the independence of noble houses. He did so carefully enough that no single action could be openly challenged, but the direction was obvious to anyone paying attention. Dante paid attention. A common-born mage suddenly rising through the ranks was unusual. That same mage being accepted into a powerful, noble family was even more unusual. That mage then appearing at the Royal Magic Academy with a Braixen of all things? The timing was simply too convenient. Tell me everything. Cedric did exactly that. He described the opening classes, the students, and the professors. He spoke of Prince Augustin's obvious familiarity with Ventis. of the strange confidence displayed by the Bratian, and of the fire blast that had left half the training field staring in disbelief. A Bratian inside Vermont was already politically dangerous. A Bratian attached to a newly elevated mage, who appeared to enjoy royal favor, was something else entirely. "You have done well," he finally said. Cedric straightened slightly. "Thank you, Father." "You may go." After the door closed, Dante returned to his desk and stared at the papers before him, though he no longer saw the words written across them. Combining all three created a piece on the political board that demanded attention. Not immediate action, as that would be foolish. The Academy was too visible, the King too watchful, and House Balatoa too well connected. No, this required patience. Dante pulled a fresh sheet of parchment toward himself and dipped his quill into the ink. If King Callister was playing a game, then it was only prudent to learn the rules before making a move. The first letters were written long after the rest of the estate had gone to sleep. Arriving home, I almost walked straight into my room when Ventis grabbed my shoulder. "We need to talk." "I really hoped you forgot about that," I said meekly, but allowed myself to be pulled into her room. If I had one, I would have waved a white flag as she dragged me inside. "Talk?" After pushing me into a plush chair, she sat on the edge of her bed and fixed me with an intense gaze. "So how come the collar does not affect you? Can you take it off?" she asked. I simply reached up and unbuckled it from my neck. Normally, any attempt to do that would leave a Pokemon's arms paralyzed with pain, or so I had learned. Instead, I removed it without issue and handed it to her. "I think I have been patient enough with you, Fenn. Trust me, I am soul-bound to you. You know I am not going to reveal your secret." Her voice was gentle, but I could feel the hurt beneath it. She knew this was connected to the mystery I had kept from her, and she could no longer simply wave it away. I wasn't always a Pokémon. I spoke through our link, my mental voice barely above a whisper. I am not proud of my previous life, and I would rather just forget it. "You are a human?" She stood up so quickly the collar nearly slipped from her hands. "Yes." I nodded slowly. "My best guess is that collars affect Pokémon minds. My mind is human, so—" "But the magic!" She began pacing back and forth. "That can only work between a human and a Pokémon." "I think my soul is that of a Pokémon." I shrugged. "At least, that's my best theory. It wasn't like I had any way to prove it. That would explain it, but still." She fell backward onto her bed. "Were you punished to become a Pokémon?" "I did not commit any crimes, if that's what you're worried about." I raised both paws defensively. It's difficult to explain." She let out a wry chuckle. "Your math theories are difficult. Come on, I can handle it. I come from a completely different world. That's why I know things that haven't been invented here yet." I motioned vaguely with my paws. Ventis blinked, then blinked again. "Okay, that's far less crazy than what I imagined. What did you think?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "That you were Arceus in disguise." The image hit me like a truck. For a second, I simply stared at her. Then I fell out of the chair laughing. Ventis immediately turned red as an apple. "Stop it," she groaned. That only made me laugh harder. For all her intelligence, somehow she had managed to come up with something even crazier than the truth. After a long bout of laughter, I finally managed to calm down and looked back at her. "Look, I am Fenn now. Who I was before doesn't matter. I'm your partner, your quirky battle sister. Can you just accept me like that?" I asked. "I do." She gently pressed her forehead against mine. "But you had better tell me cool stories about that other world," she smirked. I could not have gotten a better trainer. I beamed. The rest of the afternoon disappeared surprisingly quickly. I told her stories about glass and steel towers that reached into the clouds, about metal carriages powered not by Pokémon but by mechanical energy, and about a world filled with inventions she could barely imagine. As expected, Ventis interrupted very little. She simply listened, occasionally asking a question before soaking up every detail. "Good night, Ventis." I left her room late that evening. "Good night, Fenn," she smiled back. And just like that, a massive golem-sized boulder rolled off my shoulders. For the first time since arriving in this world, somebody knew the truth. I felt so light that I could have danced. Actually, I did. I danced all the way to my room before throwing myself onto the bed with a smile. Sleep claimed me within seconds. In the morning, I was up before even the maid or the butler. Pancakes were not a thing in this world, but everything needed to make them was. So I got to work. The smell woke almost everyone. Jolteon was the first to appear, immediately tugging on my tail with his teeth. "Come on, just a taste test," he begged. "You will eat with the others," I grinned at him. Zelia was beside me within minutes and helped cut the berries, while Reginald was put on tea duty. By the time Ventis arrived, everything was ready. "Tada," I announced, both in Pokémon speech and through our mental link. "Pancakes with combi honey and fresh berries." I poured the golden honey over the stacks of warm pancakes, letting it slowly drip down the sides. Jolteon practically launched himself at his serving like a starving puppy, while Noctowl ate with the manners of a noble gentleman. Primarina let out an excited squeak of delight, and Ventis, of course, loved them immediately. I had also prepared plates for Zelia and Reginald, so every seat at the table was occupied. The smiles, happy chatter, and enthusiastic munching soon made my own stomach growl. I finally sat down and dug into my breakfast. It was even better than the pancakes from my old world. Somehow these had turned out fluffier and lighter. The sweet and sour berries added a pleasant acidity, while the combi honey was thick, mellow, and wonderfully rich. Before leaving for the academy, I wrote a list of groceries for Zelia and handed her a whole gold coin. I was planning to introduce a few more modern foods, but for that, I would need ingredients. Our first class, physical education, began with optimism. That optimism died the moment Night Professor Garrick Stonewall arrived. The man looked as though he had been carved from granite and given a uniform. His shoulders were broad enough to block a doorway, his jaw looked capable of crushing walnuts, and the whistle hanging around his neck somehow appeared threatening. Beside him marched a Machoke carrying what appeared to be a stack of exercise equipment. "Good morning." Half the class flinched. The other half nearly jumped. "Good morning, Professor," Augustine immediately answered. "Better." Professor Stonewall pointed at the prince. "The crown is safe. At least one of you knows how to use your lungs." I immediately liked him. Duart looked equally delighted. The rest of the class appeared concerned. Today we begin with a simple warm-up. The professor pointed toward a running track circling several training fields. 5 laps. Several students visibly shuddered. Then he continued. 10 laps for the Pokémon. Move! The students immediately took off around the main track. Cedric shot forward like an arrow released from a bow. Lucien followed close behind, his long strides quickly eating up the distance. Augustine settled into a steady pace, just behind them. Ventis found herself somewhere in the middle of the pack, maintaining a respectable speed. Thanks to our training, she was in a decent condition. Olivia somehow managed to remain elegant while running, which, honestly, impressed me. Roland quickly climbed toward the front. The rest were already regretting waking up this morning. Meanwhile, the Pokémon were sent to a separate training course built around the edge of the field. Duat immediately sprinted beside me. I raced ahead with a grin. Buizel kept pace surprisingly well. Aaron ran like a tiny iron battering ram. Absol moved with effortless grace, barely seeming to touch the ground. The others, not so much. Hatena looked one harsh breeze away from falling aside. Ducklet somehow managed to look exhausted after only 2 laps, despite having wings to help. As for Gumi and Luminian, they had been directed into a long water channel running beside the packed earth track. While they couldn't exactly run laps, they were expected to swim the same distance. The poor Gumi looked as though it had just learned exercise existed. Luminian handled the task with considerably more dignity. 3 laps later, Kalen was cheering for Gumi like a worried parent. Professor Stonewall showed no mercy. "Faster!" The students groaned. "You call that running?" The groaning intensified. "My grandmother moved faster than this." By the time the running finally ended, several students had collapsed onto the grass. Then came push-ups, squats, stretches, and even partner exercises. By the end, Olivia's perfect hair had surrendered. Of course, I was having the time of my life. Duat wasn't much different. "This is great," he laughed between breaths. "It really is." We high-fived. Professor Stonewall pointed directly at us. "Now that's the attitude I want." Ventis fell into the grass beside me. "Good workout?" I asked. She stared at me while I laughed as I handed her a water flask. The enchanting class with Professor Jane Orisha was very much only for the humans, as Pokémon could not use magic in that way. While I found magical scripts as fun as the next nerd, I had pretty much learned everything she taught back in Ivelna. Ventis wasn't a talented enchanter, but she had practiced it so much that even without talent, she was better than most. If anything, she was bored. For almost 6 years of her life, she had done little besides enchanting collars. As such, she wanted to do anything but that. I had to agree. Of course, we also had defensive magic and attack magic that day, 4 classes each day, then lunch and a free afternoon. I had to hold myself back from calling the academy soft. No wonder it took 5 years of study if the pace was this laid back. Ventis would be 24 by the time she graduated, a full adult by this world's standards. Finally, on the day of flight, which was Friday, we entered a completely new classroom. By all accounts, the place looked as though a tornado had swept through it. While the student desks looked fresh and neat, dozens upon dozens of crumpled or discarded papers littered the room. There were chunks of clay that seemed to have originated from something exploding on the professor's table, and countless stone fragments scattered across the floor. One of them found my paw. Ow! I hopped on one foot and pulled the gleaming-edged rock free. "This hurts more than Lego," I muttered to myself before angrily tossing the offending stone into a corner. The other Pokémon immediately learned from my mistake and began carefully picking their way through the literal minefield of sharp rocks. We barely realized the professor was already in the room. He headbutted his own desk while standing up from behind it. "Oh, is it class time already?" he asked. His glasses sat crooked on a nose that had clearly been broken at least once. A section of his wild hair had been burned away, leaving him with the appearance of someone who had attempted to lick a Jolteon. His professor's tabard was singed in countless places, and both hands were full of the same sharp rocks scattered around the classroom. "Ah!" He tossed the rocks into a small basket, attempted and failed to wipe his hands clean on his tabard, then grinned at us like a Growlithe spotting a new chew toy. "I am Professor Thaddeus Puddle," he announced a little too loudly. The way one finger remained stuffed in his ear suggested he had recently exploded something and his hearing had yet to recover. "Please sit down." "Yes, yes." The man took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair with no success whatsoever, and raised a finger dramatically. Transmogrification is the most unique and experimental class in existence. We will learn about materials, how they react to environmental effects, and how they react to magic. His eyes sparkled. "I will teach you what fire truly is and how Earth itself can move." Ventis immediately looked at me. We both instantly understood what we were dealing with. A physics professor. A completely insane physics professor. Oh boy, I'm either going to enjoy this or laugh myself unconscious, I said through our mental link. "Probably both," she beamed back. We prepared ourselves for a loony teacher and his ramblings. It wasn't really his fault. I came from a world of science and no magic, while Professor Puddle viewed everything through the lens of magic and spirits. By the end of the lesson, my stomach muscles hurt so badly I could barely stand. Keeping a straight face had required every ounce of willpower I possessed. My paws spent most of the class clamped over my mouth. This was physics, taught by a man searching for a ghastly inside a black room while accidentally grabbing his own black cape. Nothing he said was scientifically sound. Nothing. Yet he delivered every word with such absolute confidence that it was almost painful. The worst part? Half the class appeared genuinely fascinated. Back home, I was tempted beyond reason to write a literal Physics for Dummies book and hand it to the professor. The man would likely fall to the floor foaming at the mouth from joy or simply pass out. Why are there clouds? How do volcanoes work? What is continental drift? Things like that. Nothing like what I had taught Ventis, of course. She had received the full package: atoms, gravity, chemistry, and every scrap of advanced knowledge I could still remember. There had been many times when I wanted to slam my head into a tree. Forgetting things was a very human problem. I did not possess a photographic memory. and I knew just how little I truly remembered about my old world. It was frustrating. Still, what I had taught Ventis was already hundreds of years ahead of current knowledge. I really wish I could blow the old man's mind with a physics book. I flopped onto Ventis's bed. "I mean, we could," she answered. "Huh?" I pushed my head up. "It would take ages to write it all down." I did write it all down, though. She reached into a cabinet and pulled out a massive grimoire. "When?" I asked. "After each time you left me alone to study." "Did you think I could memorize all that stuff without writing it down?" she asked, as though I were being particularly dense. "I mean, you are crazy smart," I smirked. "But that also makes sense. Let me see." I jumped off the bed and hurried over. For almost 10 minutes, I did nothing but turn page after page, my mouth hanging open wide enough for a Pidgey to build a nest inside. The book wasn't just notes. It was organized. There were diagrams, sketches, illustrations, and detailed explanations. She had even drawn an atom much like one found in a modern textbook, a central nucleus made of protons and neutrons surrounded by a cloud of electrons, complete with annotations written neatly around it. Then came water molecules, chemical reactions, gravity, weather patterns, page after page after page. While I already considered Ventis a genius, this was on a completely different level. "Judging by the feelings I'm getting from you," she smiled. "You like it?" "Like it?" I asked, as I carefully closed the grimoire. "This is condensed modern knowledge, written better than I explained it." "Yeah. I had a lot of time to think after you went off training, so I worked on how to organize everything. This grimoire," I gently patted the cover. "It's worth more than you could possibly imagine." I fell back into a nearby chair. "It's everything I taught you, everything we discussed, everything we debated. You need to place a magical seal on this so only people we approve can read it. Use your modern enchanting techniques. Make it impossible to copy or break." "Sure," she nodded, finally beginning to grasp what she had created. Learning modern science was one thing. Writing it down in a way that others could understand, study, and build upon was something else entirely. That grimoire was worth more than gold, more than diamonds. In the wrong hands, it could change the world in terrifying ways. After enchanting the grimoire and securing it in a hidden compartment behind her desk, we decided to write something smaller. It was little more than a collection of observations about physics. We intentionally kept it basic and limited it to things that could actually be tested. It really was physics for dummies. We also made sure it looked authentic. Parts were scribbled out as if mistakes had been made. Not every section was written neatly. Some looked as though they had been written on a leg while sitting outside. We added carefully placed ink stains and even a few food stains. I tossed the booklet onto the floor and enlisted Jolteon's help. Together we jumped on it several times. Primarina made sure there was a bit of water damage as well. By the time we were finished, the previously pristine booklet looked as though it had survived years of experiments, travel, and abuse. Done. This looks like some student of physics traveled halfway across the kingdom and recorded her experiments along the way. Ventis grinned proudly. Since we were both aching to see what the professor thought of it, and the afternoon was still young, we hurried back to the academy. "Sir," Ventis pulled the booklet from her side bag, "would you mind looking through my studies? I think what I learned matches quite closely with some of your own work." "My girl," the old man smiled with a fatherly expression, "I appreciate your enthusiasm, and I will look through it, but do not get your hopes up. This is a very advanced field of study." He patted Ventis on the shoulder and gently accepted the booklet. When she didn't move, however, he paused. "Oh, you want me to read it now?" He bit his lip. The professor had clearly been in the middle of setting up another experiment. Open flames and sulfur were my biggest concerns. He sighed, then opened the booklet. Just as we expected, he couldn't stop reading. Page after page disappeared. The professor's expression shifted from mild interest to concentration, then confusion, then excitement. Neither Ventis nor I interrupted him. The sun slowly drifted lower. By the time he finally reached the last page, it was late afternoon. The booklet slipped from his fingers onto the desk. His hands were shaking. "G-girl," He looked at Ventis with eyes as wide as saucers. "You did all this?" His gaze darted back to the booklet. "It's not your master's journal?" There was no accusation in his voice, only disbelief. "No, sir, it's mine. I performed those experiments with Fenn here, Mibration. She's mentioned in the notes." For the first time since opening the booklet, the professor looked at me. I simply waved with a grin. His mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. Finally, he stood so quickly that his chair toppled backward. "I am bringing this booklet to the Royal Research Laboratories immediately." His voice shook with excitement. "If even a fraction of this is accurate, then you are a certified genius." He grabbed the booklet and bolted for the door. Then, just as suddenly, he returned. The professor nearly tripped over his own feet before diving toward his desk and pulling out a magical contract. No. First things first. His quill moved so quickly it was a blur. He pressed the booklet against the parchment. Both glowed briefly before he shoved the contract toward Ventis. "Sign it." "What is it?" Ventis asked. "A research claim." He practically vibrated in place. "This ensures nobody can steal credit for your work." Ventis quickly signed. The parchment immediately split into 2 identical copies. Professor Puddle snatched one and stuffed it into a drawer. The other he handed back to her. Then he ran. Actually ran. The man vanished down the corridor with the speed of a frightened rapidash. "I have a genius in my class." His voice echoed through the building. "I have an actual genius in my class." The shouting continued long after he disappeared from sight. Ventis and I stared at one another. Then we both lost the battle. The 2 of us collapsed onto the floor laughing. When we finally arrived home, again, both Ventis and I needed some rest. With the weekend here and Ventis buried beneath a mountain of homework, the other Pokémon and I spent most of our time in the small garden. After all that training, I missed the excitement. Jolteon rolled on his back from side to side. "I actually enjoy the rest," Noctowl stated. "While I like that I have grown stronger, I lived like this for many years." The owl looked completely at ease. "I don't mind lazing about either. The food is great, and the servants treat me like a princess," Primarina beamed. "Pampered water noodle?" Jolteon scoffed. "Battle maniac stone brain," she snapped back. "Annoying diva. Useless mutt." "Could you 2 stop it?" I stomped my foot. "Sorry," the duo answered immediately. I sighed. I was already planning to ask around for training partners at the academy. We are decent, but we are far from actually strong. "Tauros droppings!" Jolteon jumped to his feet. "We are strong! We fought against a war Pokémon. We fought against an old veteran with a scar that probably made him much weaker than he was in his prime. Face it, we have barely started to grow." "I shook my head," says the one who is the strongest here. Primarina rolled her eyes. "Exactly," I nodded. "If I say we are not strong enough, that should make even more sense. I felt the Pokémon guarding the city when we arrived. Those brutes could wipe out our entire team with one paw tied behind their backs. I am not against training, but I don't know what else we could do. I can already train with rocks without any strain." Jolteon pouted. He really liked the rock idea, but it was no longer helping him improve. "I know just the type of weight," I smirked. With most people still working, unlike the students, I borrowed some parchment from Ventis's study and sketched a blueprint for lead weights hidden inside leather bands for the arms, legs, and more. The design would allow additional weights to be added over time. Lead was cheap and mostly used for scale weights. After finishing my neatly drawn plans and reference sheets, I visited both a smithy and a leatherworker. It barely cost me 4 gold to commission an absurd amount of training equipment. If I couldn't have gravity training like some spiky-haired weirdos, I would settle for extreme weights. The academy gardens were not heavily restricted. Well, a little, but since Ventis studied there, all of her Pokémon were allowed access to the grounds. A full circuit along the inner walls measured nearly 7 miles. We used it to train every afternoon once the weights arrived. Honestly, we looked insane. I carried so much weight that every step required effort. A headband, neckband, armbands, leg bands, and even a weighted tail wrap. Altogether, it was probably close to 200 pounds. Jolteon, unwilling to be outdone, immediately copied me. He promptly collapsed onto the ground. By the end of the 2nd week at the academy, I was able to jog with the weights. It was murder on my muscles, lungs, and heart. Still, I knew Pokémon were remarkably resilient. If handled carefully, the training would only make us stronger. Our training, of course, had to stop on Sunday when a banquet was announced. When I asked what the occasion was, the answer turned out to be surprisingly simple. A classmate's birthday. Since this was noble society, however, a birthday was rarely just a birthday. It was a banquet, or more. Despite her efforts, Ventis had not yet made any friends among the noble late teens. It wasn't like there were groups forming, as the class was far too small for such a thing. In reality, it was simply the fact that nobility acted very differently. There were subtle social cues that Ventis did not yet pick up on. Even I, with my Pokémon senses, could barely notice these signs, let alone understand their meaning. This was the type of you had to be born into nobility to understand thing. Still, a birthday party was just what she needed. Marianne Tidewell, the one celebrating her 19th birthday, was the least rigid member of the class, and I hoped she would come to like Ventis. Augustine was always around, but I felt that his smiles and kind remarks were shallow. Ventis thought of him as a true friend, so I did not want to break her heart by saying that the second prince was likely just being polite, possibly even under orders from his father, the king. "Stay still, or you could get burned." I pulled the curling iron away. "Sorry," she sighed. "I was just daydreaming." "About what?" I asked as I gently heated the rod once more and took a fresh lock of her hair. "About our future," she said in a serious tone. "Like, should we aim to become a battle mage, or something else entirely?" "I would aim for archmage." I slowly pulled the rod downward. "I meant a realistic goal." She rolled her eyes. "Yes, it was. I was serious." "Why? What do you want to be?" I tilted my head. "You do realize that you are already leagues ahead of the others?" "Hardly. I am still stuck on the focus thing. The damned wand, and even the training wand anyone can use, does the same thing. I cannot fully charge my spells. They just fly out before I can finish them." She huffed, then winced as she moved too close to the hot iron. "First of all, it's not your fault. You asked your teacher about it too, right?" I pulled back to carefully inspect my work. "I did." She nodded. "He told me to focus harder and imagine the spell. I already do that." "Well, we have time to figure it out." I gave a thumbs up, and Zelia immediately stepped forward to tie the newly curled hair into a ponytail. "Do you want the sea foam or the marigold ensemble?" Zelia asked. "Sea foam, please." Ventis smiled and allowed her maid to neatly dress her for the banquet. I had to admit, Ventis looked good. The seafoam ensemble fit her perfectly. The dress was elegant without being overly extravagant, its pale color bringing out her eyes, while the carefully curled ponytail gave her a mature appearance. A few silver accessories completed the outfit, making her look every bit the young noblewoman she was supposed to be. Of course, she was still Ventis. Thankfully, the carriage arrived before she could continue. The ride through Azuurport was pleasant. The afternoon sun painted the city in warm gold as merchants packed away their stalls, and nobles travelled between social engagements. Noctowl occupied one corner of the carriage with dignified silence while Primarina sat beside the window, admiring every passing building. "Oh, that balcony has flowers. You said that about the last 3 balconies," Jolteon pointed out. "Because they also had flowers." Jolteon rolled his eyes and stretched across an entire seat. "I miss training already." "You miss running around until you nearly collapse?" I asked. "Yes." To that, she did not have a comeback, so she rolled her eyes. The electric type looked proud even. The journey wasn't particularly long, and before long, the carriage turned away from the main roads and entered one of Azuurport's wealthier districts. Even among the surrounding noble residences, the Tidewell Manor stood out. Not because it was enormous, because it was beautiful. The white stone manor sat behind decorative iron fencing woven into elegant patterns resembling waves and water lilies. Large windows reflected the afternoon sunlight, while climbing ivy carefully traced sections of the walls without appearing overgrown. The grounds themselves were even more impressive. Flower gardens spread across much of the front estate, arranged in sweeping patterns that looked almost painted from above. Countless blossoms filled the air with a pleasant fragrance, while carefully maintained stone paths wound between flower beds, fountains, and trimmed hedges. Marianne wasn't kidding when she said her family liked flowers, Ventis said as she stepped from the carriage. I hopped down beside her and spotted Robert Balatoa. The young man was already here, and by the looks of it, waiting for her. Robert looked back toward the road from his place near the entrance, and finally he saw the carriage he had been waiting for. Ventis looked almost as lovely as she had on the day of their wedding and the banquet afterward. Ever since then, they had both been occupied with important matters. Ventis had, of course, begun her first year at the academy, while Robert had been busy preparing to move out of his family's manor. It wasn't as though he had been sent away, but as a newlywed couple, it was expected that they would live together. For the last 2 weeks, he had spent his time planning, packing, and occasionally panicking. Now that he had to appear as Ventis's husband at this birthday banquet, however, his mind felt strangely at ease. Bish, his Pokémon, gently poked his side and let out an amused chuckle. Robert realized he had probably been making a rather foolish face. Swallowing hard, he took a slow breath, collected himself, and walked toward the carriage. Ventis. He smiled with the calm, composed expression expected of a noble as he offered her his hand. Robert. Ventis smiled warmly and accepted it. Come, there are already a few other guests here, though not everyone has arrived yet. Robert gently led her toward the gardens. Hey, Bishop, nice to see you again. I gave the steel type a polite bow. Oh, yes, you are that, Bryson. Bishop inclined his head. Robert nearly had a mental breakdown over the political explosion you are causing. I do? I haven't noticed anything serious. I frowned. Nobles don't react publicly, Bishop replied, shaking his head. Most battles are fought with smiles, letters, and closed doors. Makes sense. Jolteon suddenly hopped between us. Lead me to the sweets. Every eye turned toward him. Even Noctowls. What? Marianne Tidewell was easy to spot. Unlike many noble ladies who carried themselves with rigid elegance, she greeted each arriving guest with an honest smile that reached her eyes. Her fresh green hair had been braided with tiny white flowers, and the pale blue dress she wore matched the countless blossoms decorating the garden. There they are! Robert waved. Happy birthday, Lady Tidewell. Ventis gave her a small box and bowed slickly. It was awkward as Ventis was big on hugs. Thank you. Robert stepped forward with his own neatly wrapped wooden box. On behalf of House Balatoa, happy birthday. Marianne accepted both carefully. Inside, the first rested a delicate silver bracelet decorated with tiny aquamarines, elegant without being overly extravagant. It's beautiful! The second one was a polished ivory fountain pen from Robert. How thoughtful! Marianne gently placed both to her growing pile of gifts. I'm glad you like it, Ventis said, visibly relaxing. I love it. Marianne smiled. Both of them. Then she turned slightly. Please enjoy yourself. There is more food and sweets than we can ever eat. She gestured toward the growing crowd around the long tables. Marianne turned towards the next incoming guests. I watched them for a few moments before deciding I wanted absolutely nothing to do with any of that. Instead, I wandered toward one of the refreshment tables reserved for Pokémon. Unlike the human banquet, ours was considerably less formal. Bowls of Pokechow, fresh berries, roasted meats, pastries suitable for Pokémon, and several large crystal pitchers filled with fruit juices had been arranged beneath a shaded canopy. I poured myself a glass of chilled citrus and berry juice before claiming a chair tucked comfortably into the back. Bliss. Bishop stood nearby, acting less like a guest and more like Robert's bodyguard. Noctowl settled onto the pilo beside me, while Primarina gracefully curled herself in a decorative fountain. Jolteon. Well, Jolteon had discovered the sweets. After demolishing 2 piles of sweet Pokémon cakes, he simply rolled onto his back. "Save me from myself," he groaned. Will he ever learn? Noctowl pecked at a chocolate-brown cookie. Unlikely. I shook my head and greedily ate my own searing hot spicy cakes. Olivia Haxon was finally happy. Not because of the banquet. No. She was happy because Ventis, who had seemed glued to Prince Augustin ever since the academy began, was now occupied with her husband, giving Olivia the perfect opportunity to cast her net over the second prince. "Oh, Prince Augustine, what a lovely day for a celebration," she began casually. She had learned that the prince was not particularly formal around Ventis, so she decided to mirror that approach. "Indeed, Lady Olivia," Augustine offered his usual pleasant smile. "I noticed House Haxon once again sent a gift of exceptional value." He resisted the urge to roll his eyes. Olivia's family had presented Marianne with an entire dresser carved from pink marble and decorated with gold. Excessive hardly covered it. "Well, I do like to uphold my family's reputation," she smiled, taking it as a compliment rather than the gentle criticism it had been intended as. Augustine had already noticed during their first weeks at the academy that Olivia did everything in her power to stay close to him. It was anything but subtle. Even this outrageously expensive gift had likely been chosen to attract attention. House Haxon is indeed one of the jewels of Vermont. "Oh, Your Highness, you are making me blush." Olivia gracefully unfolded her fan and hid the lower half of her face behind it. "Please let someone save me." Augustine kept the thought firmly inside his own head. His position did not allow him to simply excuse himself. Even though House Haxon often opposed many of his father's policies, they remained one of Vermont's most influential ducal families. Causing a scene would benefit no one. So, he smiled and endured. Meanwhile, Duwot slipped quietly into the ornamental pool beside Primarina. "Hey there! I didn't know Lady Ventis had a Primarina." "Oh?" Primarina turned gracefully toward him. "And you are?" "I am Duwot, personal partner of His Highness, Prince Augustine Vermont." The otter Pokémon proudly puffed out his chest. "Oh, really?" Primarina slowly curled the tip of her tail around him with a practiced elegance. "Tell me more." Duwot's whiskers immediately turned a delightful shade of pink. From my seat beneath the nearby tree, I nearly spat out my fruit juice. "Go on, Primarina. You got this," I called, giving her an enthusiastic thumbs up. Duwot snapped his head toward me. His face was one of complete betrayal. He silently mouthed one word, "Traitor." "That was cruel," Noctowl said, shaking his head. "Nah." I snickered into my glass. "He needs a girlfriend." Primarina's melodious giggle drifted across the water. Poor Duwot looked like he wanted to dive beneath the surface and never come back. The party lasted late into the night, and even I started to think it had gone on for far too long. Finally, when the bells tolled 10, we took our leave. I cannot eat another bite. Jolteon literally needed help climbing back into the carriage. "Maybe next time you'll hold back." Primarina chuckled. She was in an exceptionally good mood. I could tell just by looking at her. She had fallen for Duwot. The poor otter hadn't even stood a chance. She had hugged him and sung for him for almost an hour, leaving him red-faced and completely flustered. I also had to curse both myself and my newfound love for ridiculously spicy food, as I too had demolished a rather impressive amount of cookies. Ever since becoming a fire-type Pokémon, my love for hot food had grown to untold heights. Ventis, on the other hand, barely ate anything. Instead, she spent most of the evening dancing with Robert or drinking tea while talking with Marianne. It looked like she had made a new friend after all. Noctowl, meanwhile, barely did anything besides acting like the calm and proper Pokémon he always was. Before leaving, Ventis and Robert actually shared a kiss before each heading their separate way. I shivered at the thought. Even though I could feel just how happy Ventis was through our bond, I simply couldn't imagine it. I had accepted becoming a Pokémon. I had accepted becoming a female Pokémon. But the idea that I would ever get all lovey-dovey with someone? Nope, not happening. Back home, I threw myself onto my bed, happily sinking into the soft embrace of my pillow. Sleep claimed me almost immediately. The following week passed much like the last. Classes came and went, training was hell as usual, and Ventis steadily improved in every subject. The focus was still the only real drawback, but the two of us spent many late afternoons brainstorming possible solutions. On Friday, we once again met the eccentric professor, who was clearly waiting for us. I could tell because throughout the entire lesson, Professor Puddle kept glancing toward Ventis. When class ended, and the other students had left, he stopped us before we could leave. I would like to return this booklet. He handed it back to Ventis with surprising care. We have already tested everything we could, and I would like you and your Pokémon to visit the Royal Research Laboratories tomorrow. We would like to present you with the golden insignia of research for your incredible studies, as well as guarantee you a place in the first circle of researchers once you finish your academy studies, of course. The words came out in one long breath. I had almost forgotten that Professor Puddle had been absent the previous Friday because of an important breakthrough made by his research group. I would be honored. Ventis smiled warmly as she accepted the booklet back. The Royal Research Laboratories were part of the southern wing of the palace, directly beneath the Royal Library. We had to pass through 3 different checkpoints before finally being allowed inside. Each time we did, we received more than a few measuring looks. At least I now understood why. Being the rare and favored Pokémon of Vermont's greatest rival kingdom made many people suspicious of Ventis. It wasn't a great leap for someone to assume she might be an enemy spy. Of course, the king himself had ordered that we be granted access, so no one dared question us beyond the routine inspections. The laboratories looked essentially the same as Professor Puddle's classroom, in the sense that they resembled a battlefield littered with failed experiments, shattered ideas, and abandoned notes. They really need a maid to clean up this place. Ventis chuckled through our bond. Oh, I don't know. She might already be here. Somewhere under that pile of papers and broken glass. I joked, fully agreeing with her. The 7 researchers gathered inside all looked equally disheveled, tired, and quite possibly fueled by several dozen stimulants. By the smell, it was coffee. Huh! They have coffee? I muttered. What's coffee? Jolteon asked. My ears shot upright, and my tail puffed into a fluffy ball. No, you are not getting any. I spun around so quickly that even Primarina blinked. Jolteon already possessed enough energy to power a small city. Sheesh. Calm down. He rolled his eyes. I was just curious. He still sniffed the air suspiciously, clearly hoping coffee turned out to be some sort of sweet. Professor Puddle hurried toward us the moment he spotted Ventis. Wonderful! You're here! The elderly professor nearly tripped over a crate before one of his fellow researchers caught him by the sleeve. Ahem! An older woman, wearing a pristine white research coat, stepped forward, carrying a small velvet cushion. Resting upon it was an elegant golden insignia in the shape of an open book, surrounded by 7 stars. The room gradually fell silent. Lady Ventis Bellatoa Thorn, she began formally, after careful review and independent verification of the observations contained within your submitted journal, the Royal Research Laboratories have unanimously concluded that your work represents an extraordinary contribution to our understanding of the natural world. Even Professor Puddle stood perfectly still. It is therefore our honor to award you the golden insignia of research. She lifted the badge from the cushion and carefully fastened it to Ventis's school uniform. The polished gold caught the morning light, gleaming brightly against the blue fabric. Ventis simply stared at it. You are also hereby recognized as a future member of the first circle of royal researchers upon completion of your academy education. Another researcher stepped forward carrying something much heavier. A leather pouch, a very large leather pouch. He placed it into Ventis's hands. The sound alone made my ears twitch. Gold, lots of it. As decreed by His Majesty, this purse contains 100 gold crowns as a royal reward for your contribution to Vermont's scholarly advancement. Ventis nearly dropped it. What? Her voice came out barely above a whisper. 100 gold crowns. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life, all added together. Even I needed a second to process the number. Professor Puddle practically bounced on the balls of his feet. I don't know what to say. The elderly woman smiled kindly. Then simply continue asking questions, make observations, and make Vermont proud. Professor Puddle immediately nodded so hard I worried his glasses might fly off. Ventis quickly opened her enchanted satchel, transferring the mountain of gold crowns into it. We left the laboratories in a daze. The amount of money she now possessed genuinely scared her. 200 gold crowns are 2,000 gold shillings. She held her head for a long moment in her room and swallowed hard. Yep, I counted on my fingers. I think with that amount you could probably buy a small manor, complete with a maid and a butler. This is crazy. We barely gave them anything. She shook her head. Now you're beginning to understand what I meant about the grimoire. I pointed at her with my wand. We gave them scraps, and they nearly went mad over it. Yeah. She was still dazed. I needed to change the mood before she started spiraling. Did you realize he taught from our booklet yesterday? I asked. Ventis turned toward me, opened her mouth, then paused. A moment later, she slowly nodded. Yeah, he actually did. It was only the basics, but he explained them in his own words, instead of copying what we wrote. Thankfully, that was enough to bring her back to reality. By nightfall, we also figured out why her wand refused to work properly. The whole spell! Instantly! She suddenly exclaimed. What? I looked up from my notes, completely caught off guard. I've been using my hands this whole time. She practically pulled me out of my chair. When I cast naturally, I build the magic circle piece by piece as I weave the spell together. She excitedly grabbed her wand. I don't have to build it gradually, I have to imagine the entire completed magic circle all at once. It could actually work. I scratched my chin. She immediately aimed the wand across the room. Not in the house, I yelped, jumping sideways. Oh, right. She giggled sheepishly. The following morning, we headed straight for the academy. There was no rule against using the training grounds during the weekend, and thankfully, they were completely empty. Are you ready? I asked after securing a fresh straw dummy into the stand designed to keep it upright. Yes. She grinned. The moment she raised her wand, I sprinted out of the practice zone. Before the amethyst tipped focus, a massive sphere of crackling lightning burst into existence. It grew and grew until I could barely see Ventis behind the blinding light. Zap! The lightning lance exploded forward with such incredible speed that the shockwave alone threw me backward. The training dummy simply ceased to exist. There wasn't even ash left. The magical barrier surrounding the practice field shimmered violently. Cracks spread across its surface like shattered glass. For one terrifying second, it held. Then the enchantment burst apart into thousands of sparkling motes of light. Silence. Ventis slowly lowered her wand. Oh, she bit her lip. Only then did I notice the human-sized patch of molten stone glowing cherry red in the wall beyond where the dummy had once stood. Professor William Dawnmore was quietly sipping his morning coffee. One gloved hand gently turned the page of his favorite novel while the other rested on the arm of his chair. Romance was his guilty pleasure. Overly sweet stories, dramatic confessions, impossible relationships, they amused him far more than he would ever admit to another officer. It was a rather silly hobby. Still, he closed the book with a quiet sigh as movement outside his office caught his attention. One of the first-year students stood alone on the training grounds. The girl with the breaks in. Training on a free day? A tiny smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, barely noticeable on his otherwise disciplined face. Admirable. As Professor Clash had mentioned, Ventis Balatoa Thorn struggled with practical spellcasting. Out of the entire class, her spells were among the least refined. They were powerful enough, but often poorly aimed and seemed to release before they were fully formed. Seeing her here, trying to improve through extra practice, earned a measure of respect. Then, a second son appeared. William's chair scraped loudly across the floor as he shot to his feet. His first thought was that the spell had catastrophically misfired. He was already preparing to leap from the window to save the student. Instead, the blazing sphere condensed. Lightning, a bolt of blinding white, erupted from Ventis's wand. The training dummy simply vanished. Then William witnessed something he had believed impossible. The Academy's defensive barrier shimmered violently. His barrier, a defensive enchantment that had taken an entire week to construct, a barrier designed to withstand the assault of a raging Tyranitar. A barrier capable of enduring the combined bombardment of 10 battle mages for several minutes. Cracks spread across its surface. Then, shatter. The enchantment exploded into thousands of sparkling fragments that drifted through the morning air. William simply stared. For the first time in years, words failed him. Impossible. His eyes drifted from the ruined barrier to the patch of molten stone glowing in the Academy wall beyond it. Not only had the barrier failed, Ventis herself was perfectly conscious. In fact, she had hurried over to help her Brakeson back onto her feet. William reacted instantly. Without breaking stride, he cast a lightfall spell upon himself and stepped out the 4th floor window. The magic slowed his descent just enough that he landed gracefully only a few meters from the stunned pair. Ventis spun around, the color immediately drained from her face. I can explain. She raised one hesitant finger, then took an equally hesitant step backward. Well, you see, she swallowed. It was an accident? Both Ventis and I came to the conclusion that we had messed up. Big time. Instead of yelling at us, however, the military officer simply stood there in silence. Honestly, that was worse. Before anyone could speak, a black shadow descended from the sky. It landed with such weight that cracks spread through the packed earth beneath its talons. A Corvic knight. A massive one at that. I couldn't sense the overwhelming aura of an alpha, which meant this one was simply an exceptional specimen. Core, she gave a sharp cry. I understood it immediately. Message! A small brass tube was strapped to one of her legs with a neatly rolled scroll tucked inside. Professor Dawnmore removed it, broke the wax seal, and quickly read its contents. The headmaster is waiting for you two in his office, now. There was no anger in his voice, just finality. Without another word, he turned and led us toward the Academy's main building. Do you think we're going to get kicked out? Ventis asked, through our bond. Let's hope not. I tried to sound more confident than I felt. I mean, the king would probably object. She remained silent. Be prepared for a proper browbeating, though. She didn't answer, not that she have to. Our bond carried every ounce of her anxiety, far better than words ever could. Headmaster Titus Glacier's office occupied the highest floor of the Academy's central tower. It was enormous. One entire wall opened onto a balcony nearly as large as the office itself. The Corvinite had already returned and now rested peacefully upon a sturdy nest built in one corner. An Urzaring lounged nearby, lazily scratching its stomach. A Cinchino, meanwhile, sat comfortably upon the headmaster's lap, happily accepting gentle scratches behind its ears. Ventis Balatoa Thorn. The headmaster's deep voice echoed through the room. He calmly laid the scroll onto his desk, before folding his hands together. You know, there have been only 3 students in this Academy's history with a record as unusual as yours at such a young age. His calm blue eyes settled on Ventis. You entered this academy personally recommended by both His Majesty the King and Archmage Gehatu. He raised one finger. You recently received the Golden Insignia of Research. A second finger. You possess aberration that, quite frankly, refuses to make any sense. A third. And today, he glanced toward Professor Dawnmore. You shattered a magical barrier designed for wartime use. Silence filled the office. The headmaster leaned back slightly. For just a moment, it looked as though he was struggling to decide which emotion should take precedence: disbelief, concern, or curiosity. Finally, he let out a long sigh. Just who in the world are you? I just had a good teacher. And luck. Ventis answered slowly. To lend credibility to her words, I simply nodded beside her. Well, from all the reports we could gather, Titus rested a finger on the scroll before him. And trust me, Archmage Gehatu provided a very detailed one. You found this breaks in when she was still a Fennekin near the sulphur hills of Hagsrot Castle. He looked up. This makes no sense for multiple reasons. He let out a quiet sigh. The Fennekin line has been guarded extremely closely for over 200 years, and Hagsrot isn't even near the Jiaosharan border. Quite the opposite, in fact. His fingers tapped lightly against the parchment. I know most people rarely speak their true thoughts and instead come up with theories. The only reason you still possess that Pokémon is because there is a literal soul bond between the two of you. He picked up another report. I also have Master Mage Pelieni's detailed account of how the two of you met. While I have no wish to question either her integrity or yours, I must ask. His eyes settled on Ventis. Is this report accurate? Ventis stood a little straighter. It is. Titus nodded and continued. You were returning from a sulfur-gathering expedition when an Alpha Arbok attacked you. Then, seemingly out of nowhere, that Fennekin appeared and saved your life. Afterwards, in gratitude, you chose to perform a soul bond, a spell considered among the most dangerous a mage can ever attempt. It is exactly as written, Ventis replied with another respectful nod. Tell me, young lady. Professor Dawnmore suddenly spoke. How did you even learn that spell? While it isn't classified, very few students ever bother studying it because of the dangers involved. When I was little, a faint blush appeared on Ventis's cheeks. I imagined becoming a war mage one day, so I read everything the Youth Mage Academy had. She smiled sheepishly. I think I read every single book they owned. She paused. At least 3 times. A faint smirk appeared on Titus's face. Well, we certainly appreciate ambition in our mages. He folded his hands together once more. Now, about the barrier. No matter how much mana one possesses, a single spell should not have been capable of breaking it. This time, I stepped forward and gestured that I needed a moment to speak with Ventis. Neither of the two men objected. I think I know why, I told her through our bond. Really? Hope immediately lit up her face. Tell me. You see, everything we practiced back at Evelna was unfocused magic. You built incredibly powerful spells using only your hands. Now you've added a focus, a tool literally designed to concentrate magic. I tapped my wand thoughtfully. You didn't simply make the spell stronger, you compressed it. Her eyes widened. I think you accidentally created a shield-breaking spell. Instead of overwhelming the barrier with raw power, you concentrated everything into a tiny point of impact. The barrier simply couldn't disperse the force quickly enough. I shrugged. At least, that's my theory. Ventis slowly nodded before turning back toward the headmaster. We have a theory. Titus immediately raised an eyebrow. We? His gaze shifted toward me. Do you mean your Pokémon also learned human magic? Yes. Ventis nodded without hesitation. She can read and write, and we've always trained together. Impressive. The word came out, almost as a whisper. Please continue. So, Ventis collected her thoughts. We believe that because I always learned handcasting first, I naturally formed spells one piece at a time. Once I finally understood how to use a focus properly, It compressed the entire spell into one concentrated point. She looked toward the ruined training field outside. I don't think I overpowered the barrier. I think I poked a hole through it. And once the barrier failed at one point, the rest collapsed. Professor Dawnmore slowly took a step back. For the first time since Ventis had entered the academy, the veteran war mage looked genuinely unsettled. "You should understand," he said quietly, "that this style of spellcasting is considered a military secret." He stared at the young mage before him. "And you are telling us that you accidentally discovered a method of casting shield-breaking spells?" Even his normally composed expression had given way to complete bewilderment. Titus slowly raised a hand. "From this point onward, Miss Balatoa, you will limit yourself to 1/10 of the power you demonstrated today whenever you train near other students." He turned toward Professor Dawnmore. "Dawnmore, sir. Inform Professor Clash that the second training field is to remain closed until further notice. You will personally oversee the reconstruction of its enchantments." William saluted sharply. "Understood, Headmaster." Titus looked back at Ventis. "If you wish to test the limits of your magic in the future, there is a specialized training ground within the Archmage's court." He leaned forward. "From now on, you are only permitted to use that level of power there." "Understood?" "Understood, sir." Ventis bowed deeply. I immediately followed her example. "I think we got off the hook quite easily," I admitted on the way home. "Tell me about it." I felt my heart beating in my throat. She shuddered at the memory of the headmaster's office. "So, how much mana did you actually use for that spell?" I asked. "Almost half," she grimaced. "One more cast probably would have made me faint. The focus kept drawing more and more mana in. And, well, I let it. For a moment, I felt like I was on top of the world and pushed the completed spell circle to its absolute limit. Slap. Ow. She looked at me with a grumpy expression, one hand rubbing the back of her head. "Never, ever do something like that again, unless it's absolutely necessary." I crossed my arms. "Remember that we're connected. I felt my own power being drained too. I didn't stop you because I would never block you from using my magic, but that was reckless." "You're right." She sighed and lowered her head. "But..." I couldn't keep a straight face any longer. That was sick as hell. A huge grin spread across my muzzle. "I mean, you almost melted through a stone wall wider than an onyx." I burst into laughter. Now that the headmaster's axe was no longer hanging over our heads, we both finally relaxed. Ventis couldn't help laughing with me. "I'll probably need to have a specialist look at my wand, though." Her enthusiasm quickly faded. "Huh? Why?" "I broke it." She held it out with a sheepish smile. Only then did I notice the hairline cracks running through the wood, all converging toward the amethyst setting. The gem itself was still intact, but the shaft looked as though one more spell might reduce it to splinters. I could only shake my head and sigh. Sadly, my own wand wasn't a proper magical focus. It was elegant and looked the part, but it had never been designed to channel human magic. Pokémon moves didn't seem to care. As long as it was mostly made of wood, I could use it just fine. "Well?" I pointed at the enchanted satchel hanging from her belt. "You just got your wallet a whole lot fatter." She looked down at it and chuckled. "No better time than now to find a wand repair shop. I'd start looking in the Noble Quarter. If anyone sells quality focuses, it'll be there." Ventis nodded. With that, we set off in search of a wand maker. The capital's Noble Quarter was meticulously planned. Everything was clean, organized, and spacious. Shops lined the wide streets, their polished signs shimmering beneath the midday sun. By this point, we had already devoured 2 skewers while wandering past countless stores. Finally, after turning onto the main avenue not far from the royal castle, we spotted a hanging sign carved with several elegant wands. "That has to be it." The door opened with a pleasant jingle, a small brass bell hanging just above the sturdy oaken frame. "Good day." A man with a warm smile and even warmer red hair stood from behind the counter. What may I help you with, young lady? Ventis returned the smile and carefully removed her wand from the sheath at her hip. I kind of had a magical incident and cracked my wand. Would it be possible to repair it? Of course. The shopkeeper accepted it with practiced care. Let me have a look. He slowly turned the wand over in his hands. After only a few moments, however, the color began draining from his face. May I ask where you obtained this wand? Ventis tilted her head. It was a gift from the second prince. She answered so naturally that she didn't even consider hiding it. I see. The man visibly relaxed. You see, this focus was crafted by our master craftsman by the request of the prince. He rotated the wand and pointed to a tiny maker's mark burned into the wood near the grip. It perfectly matched the symbol displayed on the shop's hanging sign. I'll take it into the workshop so our master can examine it himself. Please, feel free to browse while I'm away. As he disappeared through the back door, we wandered between the display cases. There were wands of every imaginable style. Tiny ones for children, long, elegant ones meant for adults, simple polished oak, intricate ebony, carved with silver inlays. Some held sapphires, others rubies, emeralds, or amethysts. A few were so ornate they looked more like works of art than magical tools. Man, that's quite the selection, I smirked. Then, what? A thunderous shout erupted from the workshop. I'm going to speak with her. A grumpy-looking older man burst through the doorway, his work apron covered in wood shavings. The red-haired shopkeeper desperately tried to restrain him, looking absolutely horrified. Master, please! The elderly craftsman ignored him completely. His grey hair stuck out in every direction, and his face had turned almost as red as a Magikarp. He marched straight toward Ventis while clutching the cracked wand like it was a wounded child. Just how in the world did you almost shatter my best work? He demanded, waving his free hand dramatically in the air. The craftsman was completely beside himself. His nose practically looked ready to puff steam, while the veins on his forehead seemed seconds away from bursting. Ventis immediately raised both hands in surrender, and through our bond I felt her instinctively summon a thin magical barrier out of sheer shock. Sorry, sir. It was an accident. She tried to calm him. How? The still furious man demanded, though he was visibly trying to rein in his temper. This isn't physical damage. I can tell. This wand was stressed to its absolute limit. He held it up accusingly. Who did it? It was me. Ventis fidgeted with her fingers. The craftsman opened his mouth to continue shouting, but I could practically see the cogs in his head grind to a halt, as though someone had thrown a wrench into the mechanism. Say that again. His voice was no longer angry. It was confused. You did this? With your magic? Well, kind of. Yes. Ventis let the barrier fade away. I tested a spell and kind of made a mess. Even the headmaster of the academy gave me a rather strict talking to. The old man blinked several times before lifting a magnifying glass to inspect the cracks. Definitely lightning damage, he muttered. But aside from that, his eyes wandered back to Ventis. You don't exactly look like a full-fledged war mage. I only started at the academy 3 weeks ago, she admitted. That single sentence made the craftsman slowly lower himself into the nearest chair. He sat there for several long seconds before speaking again. Would you gather all your remaining magic into your hand for me? Well, I already burned through almost half of it, so this is all I have left. Ventis nodded and concentrated. A warm, fiery glow slowly gathered above her palm. The old man stared. That isn't normal magical capacity. His eyes drifted toward me. Don't tell me. You're soul bonded? I decided to step forward. Breakson. So the rumors are true. The old craftsman suddenly laughed. A real Brazian outside Jaushara. He leaned back in his chair and scratched his beard. Well, now this is a challenge. A wide grin spread across his face. I can build you a wand specifically attuned to your magical wavelength. One that won't shatter no matter how much power you pour through it. He paused. It won't be cheap. He looked at Ventis carefully. "Can you afford 500 gold shillings?" "I can." Without hesitation, Ventis reached into her enchanted satchel and produced 50 gold royals. The old craftsman simply stared. Then he burst into laughter. "Well, I'll be damned." He gently pushed the coins toward his assistant. "I'll see what I can do." From a nearby shelf, he retrieved a smooth white crystal sphere. "Please hold this and channel your magic into it. It'll record your magical signature so I can tune the focus perfectly." Ventis did as instructed. The sphere slowly filled with warm orange light before she pulled her hand away, her remaining mana now running dangerously low. "So?" she asked with a hopeful smile. "Not to rush you, but when could I expect the new wand?" The craftsman scratched his chin thoughtfully. 4 days. He nodded to himself. "I'll have it delivered directly to your residence." "Perfect." Ventis smiled and quickly wrote down our current address. In return, the assistant handed her a neatly written receipt, confirming the commission had been paid in full. The days passed peacefully. The academy was slow and, for the most part, rather boring, except for the classes where we Pokémon could actually participate. Speaking of that, a few of the others had finally started opening up. Luminian turned out to be surprisingly chatty once Duot managed to pull her into our conversations. Buizel only joined because he was competitive and refused to be left out, while Celine's Absol proved to be far less rigid than he had first appeared. Sadly, Marianne's Ducklet, Lucian's Hatena, and Olivia's Chimecho had formed their own little group. They were the snobbish, noble girls of the Pokémon side. For some reason I simply couldn't understand. Cedric's Aaron absolutely hated my guts. He made sure never to come near me, and whenever I tried being friendly, he attempted to kick sand into my face. Rude. The last one was Kalen's shy Gumi. The little blob of goo never really joined any of our groups and seemed perfectly content living in his own little world, much like his mage. Noctowl finally agreed to join our training and immediately cursed when he felt the weights I had made him fly with. He would never live that one down. Me, the one with the largest swear word dictionary in the group, immediately called him out. Language. The look he gave me could probably have set a forest on fire. Too bad for him, I was already a fire type. With jogging finally becoming possible while wearing my new weights, I decided to start practicing moves. My first attempt at quick attack while carrying nearly 200 pounds of extra weight ended exactly as expected. Me face first, into the dirt. Apparently, adding that much weight completely ruined my balance. Still, I kept trying, mostly out of spite. Jolteon was much the same, although he wisely settled for a lighter set of weights. Primarina, meanwhile, considered the entire concept of weight training a personal insult. Not that she had much choice. Every time she complained, I simply asked if she wanted me to bring back the old savage Fenn. She stopped arguing remarkably quickly. And so, the next 4 days passed in relative peace. That afternoon, Ventis's new wand finally arrived. It came inside a beautifully crafted mahogany box. When she lifted the lid, the wand rested upon a bed of deep blue velvet. It was roughly the same length as her previous one, and even reused the same amethyst crystal, but everything else had changed. The old oak had been replaced with purple heart wood, its rich violet color making the focus look almost regal. The silver filigree had given way to rose gold, its elegant patterns flowing together into twisting vines intertwined with stylized flames. Wow! Ventis gently lifted it from the box and held it close to her chest. This looks even better than the old one. I simply let out a low whistle. Downstairs, Zelia was doing her best to follow my instructions for yet another unusual recipe. She had already mastered quite a few modern sweets thanks to yours truly, but today she was attempting something entirely different. Pizza. The hardest part wasn't the toppings, it was the dough. I didn't know an exact recipe, only how it should feel beneath your fingers and how easily it should stretch without tearing. Thankfully, yeast already existed in this world, and oil was easy enough to obtain. For the toppings, I had written down several different combinations. Luckily, the manor possessed a proper bread oven, perfect for making pizza. While Ventis and I were still admiring her new wand, the smell of freshly baked pizza drifted upstairs. Both of us froze. Our heads slowly turned toward the bedroom door. Brakes? I practically launched myself down the stairs. Just as all of us were about to dig in, there was a knock at the door. Reginald, of course, stood and answered it, only to find one of the city guards waiting outside. "Is Lady Ventis Balatoa Thorn here?" the man asked with a serious expression. "Indeed, my lady is at home. What is the matter?" Reginald replied. "There is a young man called Terence, along with his 2 Pokémon, currently in the healer's hall. I was instructed to fetch her ladyship." "Terence!" Ventis shot to her feet. "Is he all right?" "I cannot say, my lady." The guard shook his head. "Please, if you would, come with me." Without another word, Ventis and all of her Pokémon hurried out, leaving Zelia and Reginald behind to look after the house. We hurried through the main streets before turning onto a quieter road leading to a long, tall stone building, the Healer's Hall. Inside, organized chaos filled every corridor. Women dressed in white hurried between beds carrying bandages, bowls of steaming water, medicines, and fresh linens. The air smelled strongly of herbs and antiseptics. The guard led us toward the intensive care ward. There, we found Terence. He and Magmar lay on neighboring beds. It had only been a day after we arrived in the capital that Terence had left to gather minerals in the nearby hills. We had given him plenty of money so he could stay at inns and buy decent meals along the way. He had only been expected back at the end of the week. To see him like this, it was horrifying. Bandages covered nearly his entire left side. His arm, leg, shoulder, and even part of his face had been wrapped. His breathing was shallow, and his normally healthy complexion had turned frighteningly pale. Magmar looked little better. The Great Fire type was wrapped almost like a mummy. Though being both a Pokémon and an Alpha, I knew he would recover far more quickly than any human could. Geodude sat beside Terence's bed, firmly holding his master's uninjured hand as though refusing to let go. His expression was grim. "What happened?" Ventis asked the nurse standing nearby. "There was an avalanche caused by a wild Pokémon," the woman explained quietly. 17 injured villagers arrived this morning. She glanced toward Terence. Terence regained consciousness for only a few minutes after arriving. Before passing out again, he specifically asked us to find you. Ventis's expression tightened. According to the other survivors, Magmar took the brunt of the rock slide while protecting dozens of people. He was eventually buried beneath the falling rocks. The nurse shook her head in disbelief. Terence, meanwhile, pushed a child out of the way before being struck by a large boulder himself. She checked a nearby chart. He suffered multiple fractures to both his arm and leg, several broken ribs, and numerous bruises. Fortunately, aside from a small cut on his face, there are no major head injuries. "He'll recover," she reassured them, "but it will be quite some time before he can walk properly or carry anything heavy." "And Magmar?" Ventis asked. "Chansey has been treating him all morning." The nurse looked genuinely amazed. "I still cannot believe he's alive, after everything I was told. Even more astonishing, if his recovery continues at this pace, he should be back on his feet in only 4 days." "Well?" Ventis nodded. "He is an Alpha." Hearing that both of them would recover allowed every one of us to finally breathe again. Ventis knelt beside Geodude and gently placed her hand over Terence's. "Stay strong," she whispered. Then she stood, reached into her purse, and produced 5 gold shillings. "I want you to buy the very best medicine available." She pressed the coins into the nurse's hands. "If you need more, send word to me immediately." The nurse stared at the money for a brief moment before carefully accepting it. "This should be more than enough." Geodude looked up at Ventis. For the first time since we had arrived, the rock type managed a small, grateful nod. Arriving home, the pizza was already cold, though neither of us was in the mood to eat anymore. Terence was like a smile magnet, so seeing him lying there like that had cast a shadow over all of us. Well, I mean, he is going to recover. I tried to sound optimistic, as no one had spoken much during the walk home. Yeah. Jolteon nodded with a forced smile. I decided to return to my room and simply pray for the boy's quick recovery. I was in the Pokémon world, so praying to Arceus honestly wasn't a weird thing to do. The next day, Ventis and I visited Terence again, and thankfully he already looked much better. He still couldn't leave his bed, but the color had started returning to his face. I peeled and sliced a few peaches for him, feeding him one piece at a time. Thanks, Fenn. He gave me his signature smile. I guess that boulder liked me even less than I like rocks. He tried to laugh, but immediately winced and gave up on the idea. Just stay still and focus on recovering for once instead of rocks. Ventis gently brushed the hair out of his face. Will do, miss. He gave her a playful wink. Oi, Fenn. Magmar's voice came from the neighboring bed, muffled beneath layers of bandages. That rockslide wasn't an accident. I turned toward him. I'd bet my good arm someone wanted to get rid of us. How come? I asked. I felt someone following us during the second week. At first, I thought I was imagining it. He frowned. Then, the night before the avalanche, I saw a Houndoom sneaking away from beneath our inn window. Not even a few minutes later, the mountain came down. His eyes narrowed. Whoever did it didn't care there were innocent people nearby. Thanks. I nodded slowly. I'll remember that. What were you talking about with Magmar? Ventis asked as we walked back toward the manor. Someone caused the avalanche on purpose. She immediately looked at me. Magmar said he spotted a Houndoom spying on them just minutes before the rockslide. He also believes they were being followed for more than a week. That's bad. Ventis bit her thumbnail as she thought. It is. I looked up and down the busy street before continuing. Let's stay on our guard from now on. With Terence and Magmar recovering, and Ventis returning to her studies, the days once again blurred together. I kept my neck on a swivel wherever we went, but nothing suspicious ever happened. Magmar was out of bed by the following week, while Terence had to slowly relearn how to walk. His face now bore a nasty scar that would remain with him for the rest of his life. I threw myself into training. Whoever had tried to kill our rocknut was going to regret it if I ever got my paws on them. Sadly, for 2 whole months I found no leads. Summer arrived in full force, and the sun baked the capital's stone streets. The only relief came from the fresh ocean breeze that drifted inland, keeping Azuureport from becoming a complete oven. The city's white walls reflected much of the sunlight, but after 3 straight days without so much as a cloud or a drop of rain, everyone except me was desperately searching for ways to cool down. Primarina even taught herself Ice Beam. She regularly coated the walls of the indoor pool with thick sheets of ice. They melted within minutes, but the chilled water made everyone noticeably happier. How are you not dying? Jolteon asked while plunging his head beneath the water. I am a fire type. I shrugged. This isn't even warm for me. I honestly felt bad for them, mostly Terence, who still walked with the help of a cane. Unfortunately, his trip into the hills surrounding the capital hadn't produced anything interesting. He was convinced that generations of miners had already stripped the area clean of anything valuable. Considering this was the largest city in the kingdom, it made perfect sense. Still, I had hoped his journey would have at least one bright side. Lately, Ventis had been completely absorbed in working on the crystal sphere Terence had found back near Hagsrot. The definitely not a Pokeball was coming along remarkably well. It wasn't nearly as perfectly carved as the one Archmage Gehatu had given her, but with a proper reference to study, she was confident she could make one herself. How do you have the patience for all that tiny work? I sighed as I watched her carefully chip away at the crystal with a miniature hammer and chisel. The tools barely fit her hands, looking more like children's toys than proper crafting equipment. A large magnifying lens had been clamped to the side of her work table, and she constantly compared the original sphere to her own, studying every tiny groove before making another careful strike. I think I'm close now. She didn't even look up. Another week or so, and it'll be finished. You mean finished carving? I leaned over to inspect the nearly completed sphere. Or finished enchanting it, too. Both, she murmured, her eyes never leaving the crystal. I see. I leaned back with a sigh and idly twirled my wand between my fingers. Since you guys are stuck here, I'm going to grab some street food. I gave everyone a thumbs up before heading out. The roads were less crowded than usual, as most people tried to avoid the oppressive midday heat. I simply stretched and walked toward the Bay District. There was some freshly cooked seafood down there with my name written all over it. The smell of salt, charcoal, and spicy food reached me, and I turned onto a side street, only to be pulled into a narrow alley. Fire instantly gathered in my throat, but before I could react, all I could focus on was a spoon. No matter how hard I tried to look away, my eyelids grew heavy. Sleep washed over me like a wave, my legs gave out beneath me, and I collapsed forward into darkness. Ventis leaned back in her chair, wiping the sweat from her forehead. Her neck ached from hours of bending over the crystal sphere, and she had unconsciously blocked most of the discomfort from reaching Fenn through their soul bond. As she stood up, however, something immediately felt wrong. The bond. It was distant, almost exactly like when Fenn fell asleep. She frowned and instinctively reached through their connection. Fenn? Nothing answered, only the quiet feeling of a sleeping mind. Fenn? She shouted through the bond. That should have worked. It always had. Fenn had left less than an hour ago. There was no reason she should already be asleep. A knot formed in Ventis's stomach. She hurried downstairs. Noctowl, she called. The owl immediately looked up. Fly up and start looking for Fenn. Something's wrong. Without hesitation, Noctowl burst through the garden doors and climbed into the sky. Jolteon! Primarina! With me! The two Pokémon hurried to her side. Primarina, search the canals. Jolteon, use Quick Attack to cover as much ground as possible. Fenn isn't answering. Neither questioned the order. They immediately split up, each taking a different direction. High above the rooftops, unnoticed by almost everyone below, a Cramorant and a Pidgeotto also took flight. By the time evening settled over Azureport, Ventis and her Pokémon had searched every street, alley, marketplace, and canal they could think of. Nothing. Even Robert had joined the search, with Bisharp accompanying Noctowl through the city while servants and guards spread across the capital. Ventis! Robert finally caught up with her on one of the main streets. I've already informed His Majesty. The king has ordered a royal search, and every city gate has been alerted. Thanks, Robert. Ventis wheezed, barely able to catch her breath after hours of running. I can still feel that she isn't hurt. But because she's unconscious, I can't tell where she is. Her legs suddenly buckled beneath her. Robert caught her before she hit the ground. You have to stop for a moment, he said gently, supporting her weight. If you keep going like this, you'll only collapse. He looked around the darkening streets before returning his gaze to her. We'll find Fenn. Ventis wanted to believe him. She truly did. But as night settled over Azureport and the bond remained silent, she could only cling to the single comforting truth she still felt through it. Fenn was unhurt. Archmage Gahatu peered through Pidgeotto's eyes as the bird circled high above the capital. His magical sight swept across rooftops, alleyways, and bustling streets until the Pokémon suddenly banked sharply. There, lying alone in a narrow alley, was Fenn's familiar witch hat. Come back and bring me the hat, Gahatu ordered through their soul bond. His connection with Pidgeotto had been forged decades ago and was as effortless as speaking aloud. Sure, Pops. The old bird folded his wings and shot back toward the palace. By the time Pidgeotto landed in the Archmage's garden, Gahatu was already waiting. The hat was carefully dropped into his waiting hands. Without wasting another second, he retrieved a crystal Pokéball from his robes and released its occupant. A massive salamence emerged with a roar, stretching its wings beneath the afternoon sun. Sniff. Gahatu held the witch hat beneath the dragon's nose. Find her. Salamence took one long, deliberate breath. His nostrils flared before his eyes narrowed with certainty. The trail was fresh. Satisfied, Gahatu climbed onto the dragon's broad back. His hip immediately protested, followed closely by both knees. "Getting old," he muttered under his breath. Years ago, he would have mounted Salamence in one smooth motion. Still, he would not allow anyone to steal that Brixen. If Fenn died, then so would his greatest hope of raising another archmage. The soul bond between her and Ventis would guarantee that the two would either rise together or fall together. Pidgeotto, aerial support only, Gahatu ordered calmly. The bird gave a sharp salute from the garden wall. Salamence spread his enormous wings. One powerful beat shattered the quiet of the garden. Another. Then the dragon launched skyward, climbing so quickly that the air cracked behind him as he tore across the summer sky, following the scent of a little Brixen. When I woke up, I felt the rhythmic thump of hooves beneath me. I was inside a carriage. Around my neck was no longer the Academy-issued decorative collar, but a heavy iron one. It hummed aggressively with magic, the cold metal digging unpleasantly into my fur. Sitting across from me was a Kadabra. Beside him sat a man dressed entirely in black, his face hidden behind a dark mask. "Good morning, sunshine," the man said in a deep, amused voice. "No need to struggle. Even if you're soul bonded, that collar has been enchanted so you can only accept commands from me." A grin spread beneath the mask. "So be smart. Maybe we'll spare your master a little torture." He chuckled. "And if you think help is coming, don't." He leaned back against the wagon. "We made sure to spread your scent in every direction. That collar also blocks your soul bond so your little mistress can't sense where you are." "Annoying loudmouth arsehole," I muttered. Naturally, he couldn't understand a word. He was right about one thing, though. No matter how hard I reached through the bond, I couldn't establish a proper connection with Ventis. What he didn't know was that I could still act on my own free will whenever I wanted. This simply wasn't the right moment. Try not to resist. The Kadabra finally spoke, his voice tired more than anything else. "We're both under his thumb, and I'd rather not watch you get hurt." I turned toward him. "Ah, so you hate his guts too?" With every fiber of my being, Kadabra let out a weary sigh. "He is the worst master I've ever known. I learned through pain not to fight him." I silently nodded. For now. Remaining calm was the smarter choice. I reached toward my bond with Ventis once more. Words refused to pass through. The only thing I could feel was her worry, a crushing amount of it. If thoughts couldn't cross, perhaps emotions could. I focused as hard as I could, sending only two simple feelings across the damaged bond. Calm, focus. "Let's hope she gets it," I muttered quietly. The heavy iron collar shifted as I tilted my head. It was horribly uncomfortable. Honestly, it reminded me of the slave collars from my previous world. Thick iron, crude craftsmanship, and an oversized lock dangling beneath my chin like some twisted ornament. I had to resist the urge to reach for it. Touching it now would only ruin the surprise I'd prepared for later. The carriage was pulled by 4 Rapidash, and thanks to them, we sped away from the capital at an incredible pace. Every bump in the road reminded me of the heavy iron collar around my neck as it slammed against my chest. By late afternoon, we finally stopped beside a river so the Rapidash could drink. The masked man climbed down from the wagon and stretched before kneeling to splash water over his face. I turned toward Kadabra. "Are you ordered to keep me inside the carriage?" "No," he shrugged. "The collar can force you to stop whenever he wants." I leaned closer. "Want to be free?" Kadabra raised an eyebrow. "I told you. It's impossible." He shook his head, then watched as I carefully stepped out of the wagon and quietly walked behind the man washing his face. "I order you to kneel and slam your face into the dirt," the man commanded without even looking back, his voice dripping with sadistic amusement. I thought for a second. Then I stomped both feet and made a convincing thud with my wand against the ground. The man snickered and took another drink. What I hadn't accounted for was the coachman. He saw everything. "Derek!" he shouted. Too late. I lunged forward, snatched the keyring from the masked man's belt, and kicked him squarely into the river before sprinting back toward the wagon. My goal wasn't my own collar. It was Kadabra's. "Kadabra! Use hypnosis!" the man roared as he surfaced, sputtering. The key slid into the lock. Kadabra slowly raised his spoon. Tink! The heavy iron collar fell onto the wagon floor. The coachman looked at the open collar, then at the freed Kadabra. He immediately realized just how utterly doomed they were. Instead of helping his companion, he turned and ran as fast as his legs could carry him. "Would you forgive me for just a moment?" Kadabra asked, looking at me with a very dark smile. He floated outside. I looked through the carriage window just in time to see the masked man lifted helplessly into the air. Then, his body folded in ways no human body ever should. Bones snapped, muscles tore. Even from inside the wagon I could hear the wet cracking beneath his screams. When Kadabra finally released him, the man hit the ground as an unrecognizable heap. The worst part. He was still alive. At least for another few moments. Well, I stared for a second. That's certainly one kind of modern art. Turning away, I unlocked my own collar and let the heavy iron ring crash onto the floor. Digging through the dying man's pockets, I found my decorated collar and happily fastened it back around my neck. Kadabra looked at me in disbelief. "You?" "Oh, don't worry," I grinned. "It doesn't affect me. It's basically just a fashion accessory." Then I tossed him the keyring. "Come on, let's free those guys." One by one, we removed the collars from the full Rapidash. The moment the last lock clicked open, the horses practically danced with excitement. After grateful nuzzles and heartfelt farewells, all four disappeared into the wilderness at full gallop. I still can't believe I'm free. Kadabra suddenly hugged me. "Yeah, well," I smiled and patted his shoulder. "It was my pleasure." I hesitated for a moment. "Say, wouldn't you like a good master? One who actually cares?" Kadabra smiled softly. "I've spent too much of my life under someone else's commands." He shook his head. "This time, I'll live free." His smile widened. "Stay safe." Before I could answer, he vanished in a flash of psychic light. "Oh well," I sighed. "He would have been a pretty cool addition to the team." "Fenn!" I flinched so hard I almost fell over. "Ow!" I rubbed the side of my head. "Don't shout!" I winced dramatically. "I'm fine. Can you feel which direction I am now?" "I can," Ventis answered immediately. There was a brief pause, probably while she relayed the news to everyone around her. Then she spoke again. "We're coming. Are you in danger?" I glanced down at the crumpled body beside the riverbank. By now, the man had stopped moving. "Nope." I scratched the back of my head. "But I don't think we'll be questioning my kidnapper." I let out a small sigh. He's kind of dead. Ventis paced back and forth across her room. Even though she could still feel Fenn's emotions through their weakened bond, calmness and focus, it did little to ease the knot in her stomach. There had been no news from the search parties. "You're going to wear a rut into the carpet." Robert shook his head with a faint smile. "Trust the king. If anyone can find her, it's his elite squad." "I can't not worry." Ventis stopped and punched her pillow. "I feel completely useless. If I'd studied something other than combat magic, maybe I'd actually have a way to find her." "She'll be found." Robert gently pulled her into a hug. At that very moment, something changed. It felt as though a thick fog had suddenly begun to lift. Ventis instinctively reached through their soul bond. The connection, previously muffled and distant, slowly opened up as if taking its first breath in hours. She gasped. "Fenn?" The shout echoed through her mind. An instant later, she winced as a wave of discomfort came back through the bond. "Don't shout," Fenn's voice complained. "I'm fine. Can you feel which direction I am now?" Ventis closed her eyes and concentrated. The bond strengthened with every passing second. I can. She opened her eyes, a smile spreading across her face for the first time all day. It's Fenn, she exclaimed, turning toward Robert. She's safe, and I can reach her again. That's great! Relief flooded the young noble's face. We're coming. Are you in danger? Ventis immediately asked through the bond. Nope, Fenn answered. But I don't think we'll be questioning my kidnapper. There was a brief pause. He's kind of dead. Ventis closed her eyes for a moment and simply nodded. Then she snapped back into action. Knocked Owl, she called. The owl immediately landed on the balcony railing. We found her. She turned toward Robert. Let's go. Gahatu had been sent on a wild goose chase all throughout the night and well into the morning. He had already used one stamina potion on himself and another on Salamence to stave off exhaustion. It wasn't wise to rely on such potions, as the backlash afterward was brutal, but he was adamant about finding the kidnappers. By now, he had killed 3 darkly dressed men, each carrying patches of Bratian fur. Scent lures. He was fuming. The last man beneath Salamence's claws had remained tight-lipped until the very end. Come on. Next, Gehatu ordered. His dragon roared in agreement. Salamence was every bit as furious and exhausted as his rider, yet he spread his wings once more and took to the skies. Nearly an hour later, they found another scent trail. This one led to a lonely carriage standing beside a river, its harness empty of Pokémon. Nearby lay a black heap, and beside the water sat a lone Bratian. Land there! Gehatu shouted over the rushing wind. Salamence folded his wings and descended. The moment Gehatu stepped onto the riverbank, he caught the metallic scent of blood. Only then did he realize the black heap was, in fact, a human body. He barely spared it a glance. Fenn. His stern expression softened into a smile. I am Archmage Gehatu. The fire type instinctively took a cautious step backward. You seem to have lost something. With a small grin, the old mage reached into his robes and produced a slightly misshapen witch hat. I visibly relaxed. Braxon? I carefully took the hat, dusted it off, placed it back on my head, and gave the old mage a polite curtsy. Yes, Gehatu chuckled. I'm well aware you're a proper young lady. His attention shifted back to the corpse. I don't suppose we'll be questioning him. He looked toward me. Did you do this? I immediately shook my head. Trying to explain that I had freed a Kadabra, who had then turned his former master into something resembling abstract art, was simply too much effort. Besides, I'd always been terrible at charades. Gehatu crouched beside the body and examined it carefully for several long moments. Eventually, he nodded to himself. I may have a lead. Without another word, he flicked a small fireball onto the corpse. The body ignited almost instantly. He then gestured toward Salamence. Come. A faint smile appeared beneath his beard. I imagine your master is worried sick by now. I couldn't exactly argue with that. With one leap, I climbed onto Salamence's back behind the old Archmage. On our way back, I gently poked the Archmage's shoulder and pointed toward a winding road in the distance. He leaned forward and focused. After a few seconds, he nodded and nudged Salamence toward it. There was a group traveling along the road. Ventis, Terrence, Robert, and all of our Pokémon. Before Salamence had even landed, I jumped off his back and sprinted toward them. Ventis barely had time to react before I crashed into her, sending both of us tumbling into the meadow beside the road. I wrapped my arms tightly around her. Missed me? I asked as she finally came to a stop on top of me. Dummy. Her eyes were already brimming with tears. Happy ones. A few landed on my snout as I gently nuzzled her cheeks. After a while, we both climbed back to our feet. Ventis wiped her eyes with the back of her sleeve while I turned toward the others. Hey guys, sorry. I honestly didn't plan on getting kidnapped. I told you to be careful. Magmar rolled his eyes, though I could easily tell how relieved he was to see me in one piece. After a rather long explanation, which conveniently skipped over exactly how my kidnapper had met his end, we finally began making our way back toward the capital. Archmage Gehatu left his Pidgeotto to accompany us, but both he and Salamence desperately needed rest after searching for nearly an entire day without stopping. The journey back took another 2 hours, and along the way we met quite a few new faces. A small elite squad of Royal Scouts and their Pokémon eventually caught up to us and quietly took up positions around our group as an escort. I felt like some kind of national treasure. Honestly, it wasn't a pleasant feeling. When we finally arrived home, Zelia rushed over and hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Even Reginald had to pull out a handkerchief to wipe at his eyes. Unlike the previous one, this was a wonderful feeling. I had always tried to make the servants feel like part of our little family alongside Ventis and the rest of us. But only now did I truly realize just how close we'd all become in such a short amount of time. While I couldn't argue with the fact that we needed some kind of security, I didn't like having a knight commander as our babysitter. Anytime we weren't inside the academy, Commander Lewis Tide was always nearby with his Feraligator. When the other Pokémon and I went to train in the afternoons, he stayed with Ventis while his Pokémon came along with us. And here I thought we were ordered to watch over some pampered noble brat's Pokémon. Feraligator chuckled as he watched us train. This actually looks like proper training. What surprised me was that he didn't just guard us. He actually gave us pointers. It turned out that knights and their Pokémon trained together as well, and weight training wasn't some novel idea I'd come up with. It was standard practice among them. He even tried on some of the training belts and arm weights himself. After a few appreciative hums, he handed them back and simply stood nearby while we worked ourselves into exhaustion. "You don't act anything like the Brakeson I once fought," he said one afternoon as he walked over to me. "You fought a Brakeson?" I asked. "Indeed I did, during the last war a few years ago. That one was a male, and he mainly focused on long-range attacks. One solid hit was enough to take him out. Unfortunately, I couldn't finish the job. His master used one of those accursed bulls to save his hide. Only then did he realize he had casually admitted to trying to kill one of my own kind. No offense, of course. It was war and all." "None taken." I nodded. "I've gotten used to a few stink eyes for being the beloved Pokémon of the enemy kingdom and all." "How did you end up here?" he asked. "I'm not exactly a scholar, but even I know the Fennekin line isn't common, not even in Jaushara." "No clue, honestly." I shrugged. "I was born here. Never knew my parents either." Rough." He scratched the back of his head and gave me a sympathetic look. Summer passed in the blink of an eye, and Ventis passed all of her half-year exams with excellent scores. There were no further attempts on our lives, and from what little we heard, Gehatu had blown up a building belonging to some shady organization. Whether he had discovered who was behind the kidnapping or why we had been targeted, he never told us. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever wanted us gone hadn't given up. "I kind of forgot to tell you guys," Ventis said one Saturday morning. "My birthday is coming up soon. I almost forgot about it myself since I haven't celebrated it in 7 years." She smiled sheepishly. "What?" I practically jumped. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Miss is going to have a birthday?" Reginald fixed his gaze on her. "When?" "In a week," she admitted. "Then I must begin at once." The butler rose from his chair with the expression of a man heading into battle. "Oh, there is really no need." Ventis started, but Reginald firmly shook his head. "Lady Ventis, this is a serious matter. You must accept that, with your marriage, you are now a noble. A noble's birthday is an important social occasion." He bowed crisply before hurrying out of the dining room. That very afternoon, Robert arrived to help Reginald organize the celebration. The banquet was planned for the gardens of the Balatoa family's capital manor, and invitations were quickly drafted for all of Ventis's classmates. While nobody was looking, I quietly slipped a small note onto the invitation list. A few more names wouldn't hurt. Count Evelina, Master Peline, and, just for good measure, Archmage Gehatu. That last one probably wouldn't come, but that wasn't really the point. The important part was extending the invitation. He had crossed half the kingdom trying to save me, even if he'd arrived just a little too late. Marquise Romero Balatoa, naturally, paid for the entire celebration. And then some. The Balatoa capital manor had been transformed over the last few days. Gardeners trimmed every hedge until they looked sculpted by magic. Flowerbeds bloomed in orderly rows of blue and white, matching the colors of Vermont, while servants hurried back and forth carrying tables, chairs, silverware, and enough food to feed a small village. A string quartet rehearsed beneath a marble gazebo, their melodies drifting lazily across the gardens. Ventis looked ready to disappear into the nearest bush. Every passing servant greeted her with a respectful bow, making her shoulders sink lower each time. Before either of us could escape, a deep, steady voice called from behind, "So this is our newest daughter." We turned together. Marquise Romero Balatoa was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, dressed in an elegant navy blue noble's coat embroidered with silver thread. His dark hair had begun surrendering to grey around the temples, while his neatly trimmed beard gave him an air somewhere between a successful merchant and a retired general. His eyes, however, were kind. Standing beside him was a graceful woman wearing a flowing emerald dress decorated with delicate golden embroidery. Her chestnut hair had been tied into an intricate bun held together by pearl pins. "My dear," she smiled warmly, stepping forward before Ventis could even bow. No need to look so frightened. She gently embraced the young mage. "I am Eleanor Balatoa." Ventis stood completely frozen. Ventis slowly relaxed before carefully returning the hug. Eleanor smiled as though she'd just received the greatest gift imaginable. "My husband may look intimidating," she whispered conspiratorially, "but he's really just a big softy." "I heard that," Romero sighed. "I was standing 3 steps away." "I know." She smiled sweetly. "I wanted you to." The Marquis rubbed the bridge of his nose while Robert quietly looked away, clearly used to this exchange. "I apologize for not properly welcoming you sooner, Lady Ventis," Romero said, returning his attention to her. "Circumstances have been unusually busy back at our land. I understand. Lord Father." The title slipped out almost accidentally. The Marquis blinked. Then a genuine smile spread beneath his beard. "I was hoping you'd call me that," he smiled. "But Father is enough." "So?" Another voice suddenly interrupted. "Is this the mysterious little brother's wife everyone's been talking about?" A tall young man with neatly combed dark hair approached with easy confidence. His clothing was almost as formal as the Marquis's, though noticeably more practical. "Adamis Balatoa," he introduced himself with a polite bow, "first son of the family." His expression remained composed, though there was obvious curiosity in his eyes. "So you're the young mage Father can't stop hearing about?" Before Ventis could answer, another man casually wrapped an arm around Robert's shoulders from behind. "And I'm the better-looking brother, Rickard." The man grinned so broadly it looked painful. "Second son." Robert sighed as his brother messed up his hair. Rickard looked toward Ventis with an easy smile. "So, how's married life treating my hopeless little brother?" Robert's ears turned red. "Rickard." "What? I'm just making conversation." He leaned closer to Ventis and lowered his voice dramatically. "If he starts talking about sword maintenance during dinner, just nod every few minutes. Works every time." Robert simply groaned at that comment. Rickard laughed before gently patting his younger brother on the shoulder. "I'm kidding. Mostly.